All right, let's get it. Drive time Tuesday afternoon, 12 minutes past the hour of 2 o'clock. It is a Chamber of Commerce Salt Lake City day outside. It's about 75 degrees, clear and sunny here in downtown Salt Lake City, Utah, as we have turned our calendars to June, but it feels more springish outside. But as it is every single day, it's good to have you along for the ride. Spence Checketts behind the mic, Porter Larson behind the glass, producing the program, booking the program today. We are one day away from the battle for Lord Stanley's Cup, the Stanley Cup Finals between Edmonton and Florida. A rematch gets rolling tomorrow. Then the NBA Finals will start on Thursday. Friendly reminder, we are your home of, well, not just the NBA and the Stanley Cup Finals, but all the biggest and best sporting events out there here on ESPN 700. So if you're looking to listen to either the Stanley Cup Finals or the NBA Finals, we are your home for that. So we'll get you ready for both those series, as we are the evening of the night before Stanley Cup and then 48 hours away from the NBA stuff. Breaking news right out of the gates. The New York Knicks have fired Tom Thibodeau after by far the best run that the team has had in 25 years. We'll get into that on the show today. Have some good NBA guests to talk about that on the show today. And the day after, Austin Ainge was introduced as the new president of basketball operations for the Utah Jazz. We'll kind of react to some of the things Austin had to say yesterday. His response to a very, very good question posed to him by our very own Sean O'Connell about potentially tanking next year. Austin with a dynamite soundbite, and no part of me believes he's telling the truth. We'll talk about why trying to win as many games possible next year is an exercise in futility for a roster with not a lot of talent. It's great that you've locked in a front office you believe in. It's great that you've locked in a head coach that you believe in. If you don't have players, it doesn't matter who's coaching your team or who your general manager is, who your president is, who your CEO is, who your owner is. If you do not have players, you are in trouble, and the Jazz just don't. So we'll get into a bunch of it on the show today. Bobby Marks setting out his Jazz offseason spreadsheet that we'll kind of dig into a little bit to kind of understand what the Jazz can do this offseason and why next offseason is probably the more likely situation of when they can actually add talent that would make them a little bit more viable than clearly the 15th best roster in the West so far this year and entering next year. So we'll get into it on the show today. Former Ute Johnny Bryant is already being discussed as the next head coach of both the New York Knicks and the Phoenix Suns. Some other names are out there. I think you're going to hear a lot of Jay Wright. I think you're going to hear a lot of Michael Malone, who is a New Yorker by trade. Interesting news cycle this year as it pertains to coaching in pro basketball, where some really, really good coaches who have done a really, really good job lost their jobs. Most of the former coaches of the year are out of work. Luckily, these guys signed contracts where Tom Thibodeau has an extension that goes through 2028, and the Knicks owe him $30 million. So he'll receive $30 million to not to work, which must be nice. But a lot of NBA news to get to today, of course, with the NBA Finals, NBA Draft, just over 3 weeks away now. And we have excellent coverage for you guys of both the first and the second round. Stay tuned as we're kind of locking in the details, but we'll do both the first and the second round after our afternoon drive show. So starting at 6 o'clock, you'll hear live coverage of the NBA Draft. Gordy Chaser, Richard Smith, two guys that were in draft rooms for decades and decades and decades. And we'll react to the picks the Jazz make. As of now, the Jazz have 5 and 21. They've got a couple of second rounders as well. So we'll dig into it, all the storylines on the program today. RSL has a 7-match winless streak. Reinforcements cannot be added until mid-July. So RSL on a little bit of a break. We'll bring in Pablo Mastroeni, RSL head coach today, see how our guys holding up and how the progress is kind of going to see if they can get back off the snide. Diego Luna will be with the U.S. men's national team playing in the World Cup. And as Christopher Camerani likes to say on the show, RSL this year does one thing pretty well. They Diego Luna well. And outside of that, they don't do much well. So Diego's gone for about a month and a half. We'll see what Pablo has to say about trying to replace his production. Tim McMahon, NBA Daily Assist style. Tim sent out a tweet of his suitcase where I believe he has 10 pairs of shoes packed for the NBA Finals. We won't talk a lot about that, but that kind of caught me off guard. I didn't take Tim to be a sneakerhead like that. But, of course, we'll talk about the Austin Ainge media availability. We'll talk about offseason for the Utah Jazz. And then we'll get into the stuff with Tom Thibodeau and who Tim thinks is going to take that New York job. Then obviously preview the NBA Finals. Sarah Todd, Deseret News, covers the Utah Jazz. She's had some interesting takeaways from ultimately what happened yesterday with Austin Ainge's media availability and what the Jazz could do this offseason. And then I'll be on TV tonight with Dave Fox. Begrudgingly, I have agreed to do it. 10:35, we call it 5 Questions with Spence. So Dave will stop by today in the 4 o'clock hour to enlighten, to illuminate, and to entertain. Pablo Mastroianni, Tim McMahon, Sarah Todd, Dave Fox, me, Spence Checketts, all of you, the great listeners, and that guy, Porter Larson. On a Tuesday afternoon, that kazoo-blowing, fedora-wearing idiot really did it. He fired Tom Thibodeau. I'm honestly stunned, and maybe I shouldn't be. Taylor Jenkins, Michael Malone, Frank Vogel, I could keep going. What do you think? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, obviously when you look at it on its face, Tom Thibodeau gave the Knicks their best couple of seasons since 2013 or before, and then an Eastern Conference Finals run. It's hard to argue with the results for one Tom Thibodeau. And listen, you know this, just going back and forth with me, I've always been kind of lukewarm on him. I always have felt like there is maybe that glass ceiling, different term, but an actual ceiling there with Thibodeau just based on some of his coaching styles. But I don't know that it was firing time. The one thing I'll say, Spence, is that if there is a particular name that they already have a connection with and he's ready to go and they have someone kind of on deck, then maybe I'm okay with it, especially if his name's Jay Wright or a real good name that you look at on the coaching market. Then, hey, let's try it out while this core is together and while this roster is still good. But I very much would have been fine running it back with Tibbs.
So we'll get into it today. We have some good NBA guests. I'm stunned, as I've said before, and I will say it again, and I'll say it probably until it changes. The Knicks will not win a championship while that clown owns the team. The clown is Jim Dolan. He really does play a kazoo in a band that he bankrolls and makes his employees go see at night in New York. It's a real thing. So we'll get into it. Pablo Mastroianni, our first guest, to do a little RSL. But before we catch up with our guy on a Tuesday afternoon, courtesy of our friends at Prize Picks, it's time now for your opening tip.
Welcome to The Drive with Spence Checketts on Utah's #1 sports talk. Now into the studios of ESPN 700 to set the scene for the show. The opening tip of The Drive is brought to you by Prize Picks. Use the code ESPN 700 and run your game with Prize Picks.
Prize Picks, best place to turn your sports knowledge into cash. With millions of members, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players. For a shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash, you can run your game all season long on Prize Picks. Do you know ball? Question mark. There's only one series left in the playoffs, and the championship is officially on the line. That means time is running out for you to put your final takes to the test on Prize Picks, the best place to cash in on your favorite sports. So download the Prize Picks app today. Use the promo code ESPN700, and they're going to hook you up with $50 when you play that first $5 lineup. Don't even have to win the lineup. They're just going to give you $50 regardless. So download the Prize Picks app today for free. Use the promo code ESPN700 at checkout. They're going to hook you up with $50 when you play that first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game all season long. All right, so I'll call it shocking, surprising news. I know that certain people on basketball social media who think they know more about basketball than a guy like Tom Thibodeau are trying to dig in as to why this makes sense. It doesn't. It's stupid. Fresh off the deepest playoff run the New York Knicks have had in 25 years, they fired Tom Thibodeau, who's made the playoffs for the past 5 seasons. Over the past 3 years, playoff wins. #1, Boston. #2, Denver. #3, New York. Back-to-back 50-win seasons for the first time since 1994 and 1995. Prior to that, it was 1991, 1992. It has been literally 30 years since this franchise has won 50 games in back-to-back years. Tom Thibodeau brought them back to relevance. They were ahead of schedule, as we've discussed. No part of me thought they had even a chance to hang with Boston. And let me remind you, they were up 3-1 on the Celtics before Tatum's injury, okay? This team was built with the idea of Boston having to break down their team because of luxury tax and second apron implications as a result of the new CBA, where the new ownership group in Boston next year is set to write a check for $500 million just for the right to have the roster. That's not even including what they're paying their players. And they've got max money guys. They've got Jaylen Brown. They've got Jason Tatum. They're paying Porzingis. They're paying Derek White. They're paying Drew Holiday. That's an expensive team. And so the Knicks were kind of built with the idea of, okay, maybe we'll just concede that Boston's really good again this year. We don't really have a chance against them. But next year, if Boston breaks it down, then we're going to be right there with everybody else. Now, the Pacers spoiled everybody's party. Nobody thought the Pacers would be the Eastern Conference rep in the final, but they are. So a seriously misguided, stupid decision today to fire Tom Thibodeau. There's no other way around it. He did a remarkable job. He was the coach of the year 3 years ago. 3 years ago, they beat Boston. He undressed Joe Mazzulla. Now, he was outcoached, in my opinion, by Rick Carlisle, and I have been very honest about that. Now, Tom gets a lot of heat for not digging into his bench very much and playing his starters a lot of minutes. Did you notice who was on the Knicks bench? Really not a lot of great options. Okay, so we saw Tom dust off Landry Shamet and former Ute DeLon Wright. When it came to the Indiana series, at that point, it was probably too late. But they do not have a great bench. They're very top-heavy. And Leon Rose was calculated about identifying Jalen Brunson. And really, that was as a result of what the Mavs did to the Jazz when Luka Doncic was hurt and Jalen took over as the primary offensive initiator. And everybody's like, oh, dude, is this real? Well, it's turned out to be real and then some. And then some really good decisions, bringing in Josh Hart, bringing in OG Anunoby when Toronto decided they were going to yard sale. This really could come down to one thing, and that is the CAA relationship depth between Karl Anthony Towns, Leon Rose, and Worldwide Wes. Because Karl Anthony Towns has known these guys since he was a freshman at the University of Kentucky. And there is speculation that Karl Anthony Towns actually didn't like playing for Tom in Minnesota. Remember, this is their second stop together. And there's speculation that Cat didn't love playing for Tom Thibodeau in New York. And Karl Anthony Towns is under contract and is actually up for an extension. And the problem is the coach is the one that always falls on the sword. You can trade players, but you're not going to cut Cat, and you're not going to trade Cat unless you get a lot in return. So if this was a power struggle between Karl Anthony Towns and Tom Thibodeau, maybe Leon Rose really had no choice. This does reek of another misguided decision from the worst owner in professional sports by far, and that's James Dolan. He was named by Sports Illustrated as the worst owner in pro sports twice for owning the Knicks and the Rangers. He is a guy that is more focused on truly playing the kazoo in a band, which he bankrolls with some of the best musicians in New York and forces his employees to come watch his stupid band. Like this is why, since he took over, it has been more or less a bleep show. And as long as he owns the team, it will be more or less a bleep show. And finally, they actually had gone about their business the right way to build this thing slowly. Leon Rose came in, was a longtime agent, and did a good job of making sure that they didn't make rash decisions, making sure that they weren't trying to sign some aged, overpriced superstar like Amari Stoudemire to believe he could be what he was a decade ago. They did it slowly. They made right decisions. They were on the right track. But today is a step in the wrong direction. They have personnel issues. If they want to take the next step from an Eastern Conference Finals team to an NBA Finals team, it wasn't because of the guy coaching the team. It was because of their lack of depth and the defensive issues that present themselves when you have Karl Anthony Towns on your roster. Minnesota fans know this. So, stunned. It's a dumb move, okay? Now, before we catch a break, I think one of the things that we should point out here is, while I still believe the Utah Jazz have a ton of work to do with roster construction to even be relevant and somewhat competitive. And I'm not talking about being in close games and winning 30, 35 games. Who gives a rip about that? I'm talking about getting back to the postseason and advancing, competing for home court, giving this fan base something to actually latch onto. So while I think the rebuild, and we're entering year 4 of the rebuild, okay? Don't listen to the propagated information coming out of team-owned media outlets like, yeah, we actually tore it down for 3 years, and it's only 1 year. No, it's not. This is year 4. You're on the clock. And it's been bad. It's been clunky. The draft picks so far, for the most part, have not been great. Now, they're so young, I'm not willing to anoint or dismiss. We'll give them time to grow. But I think one of the things that could turn out to be a really smart move by Ryan is locking in a front office and a coaching staff that you do believe in and then riding with them. Will Hardy was rewarded with a 5-year extension for winning 30% of his basketball games. Tom Thibodeau just lost his job after going to the Eastern Conference Finals and winning 50 games in back-to-back years. Think about that for a second. Will Hardy is going to receive a 9-year runway, and he's won 30% of his games. Tom Thibodeau just lost his job after the most successful 5-year stretch the Knicks have had since the late 90s. Okay, so what New York did today is exactly why they've been treading water and running in circles for 25 years. So while the Jazz have a marathon to go with actually finding talent to make this team relevant, what Ryan has done is decided to give these front office people and his coaching staff a ton of security and runway. Now, only time will tell as to whether or not that's the right move, but hypothetically, theoretically speaking, it is the right thing to do if you believe in your people. Now you've got to go find players. We'll catch a quick break. We're going to bring in Sarah Todd coming up on the other side. Move over to Tim McMahon. We also have Pablo Mastroeni and Dave Fox. We got a busy Tuesday show, and it's good to have you with us right here on ESPN 700.
Sean O'Connell, ESPN 700. As someone correctly stated, seems like a team in a rebuild, and some things were done this past season to potentially manipulate where the team would end up in the draft lottery odds. And unfortunately, some of that is dependent on luck, and team got a little bit unlucky. So do you have a philosophy? What is your philosophy on, for lack of a better term, to be indelicate, tanking or, manipulating minutes and player performance in order to achieve better lottery odds?
We won't see that this year.
Yesterday, during Austin Ainge's media availability, our very own Sean O'Connell, the question that has made the rounds. A lot of people have reacted to it. Our next guest was also present, and certainly we'll have some thoughts on that and all things related to the Utah Jazz. Two-time Utah Sports Writer of the Year, Sarah Todd, Deseret News. Sarah, happy Tuesday. How are you?
I'm doing great. I actually was not present, so I should say that. I'm actually in San Diego, so.
Sarah, literally nobody knew that. You could have just faked it you were there.
I know. Honor system. I started to feel bad before I even talked.
That says a lot about you. I'm jealous you're in San Diego, but let's get your reaction and also whether or not you believe what Austin had to say, that this idea of making sure certain players are encouraged to not show up for work in order to have the best lottery odds is something we will not see from the Jazz next year.
Yeah, I mean, I was just as shocked as everyone else. I mean, not just from that comment, but through the whole press conference. I mean, the way that it started, right off the bat, like Ryan Smith had some comments, Austin said some comments, and then they opened it up for questions. But literally, like, the first thing that Ryan said to reporters was, I know everyone's going to probably have some questions about, like, organizational structure and hierarchy, and I'm going to clear that up right now. Like, Austin is in charge. He has final say. He'll be giving the recommendations to me. And so what I would thought was going to end up being another confusing press conference like it was when Danny Ainge was hired was not like that at all. It was very clear that they are making Austin Ainge the most powerful decision maker in the front office. And so that was surprising. The second thing that was surprising was that Danny Ainge, by all accounts, did not know that this was happening, that they weren't like interviewing president of basketball operations candidates, and that it all happened what seemed very impulsively. So that was a second surprising thing. And then the final surprising thing was a very clear and concise, you just play the audio, you won't see that next year as it pertains to tanking. And I reached out to different people within the organization and kind of pretty frankly, like, asked people, like, is this real, or are we just being told what needs to be told? And I was told pretty plainly, like, no, this is real. Now, there's two ways that could go, right? Like, the Jazz could trade away enough players to where tanking by manipulating injury reports and minutes and games played is not necessary in order for them to be bad enough. Or they will just play the roster they have and live with the results. But I've been told by a number of people that they do not plan to tank.
All right. Well, let's. I don't believe. Okay. I don't believe them. I don't believe what Austin said to be a truthful statement. I thought it was a great soundbite. And respectfully, Sarah, if anybody out there is buying that Danny didn't know Ryan was talking to his son about this job, I've got a great piece of property we can talk about. Like, there's no way that happened behind closed doors either. But let's operate, because your sources are good as any beat writer we have in the market. You're connected. So if we operate off the assumption and take Austin at his word that next year they are going to put their best foot forward and not be unserious about competition, you tell me what that looks like in your opinion, because as we've talked about and as you know, they have a top 8 protected pick next year that if they don't finish in the top 8, that pick goes to the team that's about to win the world championship. But if they hold on to that pick next year, the first round convey turns into second rounders the year after. So it really makes zero sense to go all in on trying to win if there's a chance that you win 32 games and draft ninth and send that to OKC. In my opinion, the smart approach is doing everything you can to hold on to that asset, especially based off of where this team is in the process of trying to get back to relevance. So if he's telling the truth and they go all in and they try to win next year, what does that look like?
Well, I think that's the difference is I don't believe that they're going to go all in and try to win. I think that there is a difference between not tanking and trying to win. Like there is a middle ground there, which is why I believe that if they're talking about, like if they're being serious about not manipulating the injury report in minutes, I think that you have to offload players from the roster in order to make it so that you can put your best foot forward and still keep that top 8 pick. And so that's what I think it looks like. I think that it looks like you can't just hang on to these contracts. I think that the fact that you have quite a few expiring deals now means that it's probably going to be easier to get rid of guys like John Collins, Jordan Clarkson. I think that it makes it interesting when you think about what kind of suitors may come calling for Walker Kessler or Lauri Markkanen. I think that those are kind of more likely than they ever have been to be moved. I don't mean that super likely, but more likely than they were previously. And so if you are going to make it to where the roster is bad enough that you don't have to manipulate it in order to keep that top 8 pick, that feels like what is probably going to happen. And I agree with you. Like, and I'm pretty sure at this point, it doesn't even turn into seconds. Like after this year, if the Jazz don't convey the pick to OKC, the obligation extinguishes. And so that's even more of a reason. Like, don't give this finals team a lottery pick, because that would just make the Western Conference even more difficult. Like, don't reward them when you could just keep the pick. And so, I mean, it just feels insane if they were to not go after that pick. And so if they're going to stand by the word that they're not going to manipulate things in order to get better lottery odds as it pertains to like performances and minutes, then I would expect a lot of trading to start happening.
Yeah, well said. I do think there's a world because in my opinion, it's Lowry and it's Walker are the two players where you've got a little something there. Okay, I have questions about literally every other player on the roster. So if you wanted to tank and also meet the minimum salary floor requirements, because you do have to pay players, then moving on from Markkanen and Kessler and holding on to Collins, Clarkson, and Sexton is something that you could probably look at, because due respect to those three that are all good guys, that's the kind of situation. Like John Collins might be a perfect vet for a team that's not trying to win, even though, you know, they're claiming they're not going to manipulate minutes, because he's making 26.5. And while he's been good in spurts, he's fine to have on the roster because John Collins is not going to win you a bunch of games. Markkanen and Kessler are good enough that if you play them, I don't know, if they play 65 to 70 games, they're good enough that you are going to win games. We've seen Lowry be able to do that, and Walker is an emerging player in this league. So what do you think of the potential of maybe moving on from Markkanen and Kessler, holding on to the other veterans, and then playing the young players a grip of minutes that could include 4 new rookies on the roster?
Yeah, I mean, and it kind of depends on what kind of timeline that you're going to be looking at, right? Like these are all discussions that are going to be happening in the very coming days and weeks with Austin Ainge and the rest of the front office. Like the idea of if you're moving on from Kessler, who is going into his 4th year, and Markkanen, who is now kind of really entering the prime of his career in age, and you're thinking, okay, we're just going to have like the contracts that you're talking about, John Collins, Colin Sexton, on the roster in order to take up money space, but banking on young players that we can get this year with the 5th pick and maybe next year with a top 8 pick, then you're talking about an even longer timeline. Obviously, you'd be getting more picks if you were to unload Kessler and Markkanen. And so what are you going to do with those? What do the trade and free agent markets look like down the road 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now? And so if you were to move those guys, it feels like an even more elongated timeline. And if that's what they want to do, and if that's what they feel comfortable with and will be more successful for the team, like I'm not going to say that it's not, but just, you know, it would be another reason to temper the expectations of fans who think like, oh, he came in, he said that there's not going to be any tanking. This is it. We're going to go win. It's like, no, this actually could be a situation where things could take longer than expected.
On the other side, okay, and we'll just kind of talk about possibilities, Sarah, because there's no way of knowing how this will go. But, even Ryan yesterday, when Austin alluded to the success that he and his dad had in Boston, Ryan said, I'd take some of that success right now. And Ryan, oftentimes in the past, has, I heard Ryan talk about a potential Kristaps Porzingis deal that he thought they had done. Bobby Marks on my show said he was told that the Jazz had a really nice offer for Drew Holiday, and Drew wanted to go play in Boston because he thought they could win, and they did. He's an NBA champion now. So we know that Ryan has expressed in the past the desire to bring in really good players. I still don't know who the guy down there was that uttered the phrase, we are going to sign Paul George and trade for Mikal Bridges, but good luck. I mean, that would have been awesome. Obviously, that was not steeped in reality. But those are the desires that certain people down there have. And we are entering, Sarah, an off-season where Kevin Durant and maybe Giannis and maybe Kat, and I could keep going. I mean, I don't know what Phoenix does, but they've got a problem where they've got to try to find some answers. Boston has a really expensive roster. They'll probably jet in some players. The Jazz do not have cap space. John Collins is probably going to pick up his player option. I'll go out on a limb there. If he doesn't, then we have a different conversation. Next year is the offseason where the Jazz have very clean books. So next year is the year that I think it's more realistic to talk about adding more viable pieces and talent to give them a better chance of competing. But are there avenues for the Jazz to add talent this offseason to make next year much more competitive? And if you're able to add a couple of really good veteran players, add them to these young pieces, and maybe put a couple players next to Lowry and Walker, is that a real scenario for the Jazz this offseason to add some really good veteran players and actually take a couple of tangible steps forward next year?
It doesn't feel real.
I agree.
Because even if we're talking about, like, some of the guys that are on the table right now, like Giannis, right? Like, why in any world or any scenario would Milwaukee talk to Utah about the 5th pick and some of the young players that the Jazz have when clearly they could have the 2nd pick from San Antonio and better young players? I just think that there are better deals and better situations that the Bucks would want to deal with. Like, they're not looking to get rid of Giannis and be completely in the lurch with someone like Isaiah Collier, who's not proven and probably is going to end up being like a backup point guard at best at this point with what we know about him. Why would they do that if they could just get Dylan Harper and, Devin Vassell or something like that? So it just doesn't feel like the Jazz have the players and picks that a lot of other teams could offer the Bucks right now. But I just can't get past the fact that the Jazz are just not in a position to be okay with giving up that top 8 pick next year. It just feels irresponsible to do that. And so I don't see that happening. I don't see them wanting or willing to just give it up outright just to get a few more wins. But I think the biggest question is who is ultimately making that decision at the end, right? Like, we know that the front office hierarchy, what we've been told is that Austin Ainge is in charge, but like every other professional sports team, he will make a decision and take that decision to ownership. And that is where the true final say happens. That is with every professional sports organization. Ownership signs off on decisions. And in this case, it's Ryan Smith. And he literally tweeted out that he was screaming outside the day after the lottery. Like, he is emotional and he reacts to things as a fan. He is a fan of this team that he owns. And so if Ryan Smith wants to win, I think that is what is going to push decisions.
When it comes to the front office hierarchy, I guess we can only go off of what we've been told. Does it feel like Justin Zanuck and Danny Ainge report to Austin Ainge? Is that the gut feel? Is that kind of how this thing is going to play out?
That's what I mean. That's what we're led to believe right now, right? And
Yeah.
like, if the president of basketball operations job has been open for 3 years, and they haven't made any indication that they were going to promote Justin Zanuck, and he has stayed and for, by all accounts, happily been in the position of general manager. And if you're there for 3 years while that job is open, I don't think that Zanuck ever expected to have that job, you know? But it is a strange dynamic to have the new person come in and have everybody be reporting to them, including his father.
Were you surprised that Danny was not quoted in any press releases nor was made available during the media stuff?
I'm not surprised by that at all. I mean, number one, it's not shocking that they didn't make him available because probably posing some weird questions to him would be uncomfortable. So, why would they make him available for that, right? But then also a little unfair to Austin, right? If he just got hired as president of basketball operations, it's the biggest job in the NBA that he's ever had. It would feel a little infantilizing to be okay, now let's talk to your daddy.
Okay, if you put it like that, I guess I'm on board. What do you? Okay, let's see how to pose this question. If you got Zanuck in an honest moment about this entire thing, and let me start with this: we all want to keep our jobs, and there are not a lot of NBA general manager jobs out there. Now, Zanuck at one point was thought to be the new GM in Milwaukee. Before that went to Horst. And then he was elevated after Dennis Lindsay decided he was not interested in working for this ownership group anymore. So ultimately, I'm sure the bottom line for Jay-Z is I'm an NBA general manager, and this is awesome, and I love my job. But I wonder ultimately how he feels about this entire thing, where it's clear that he's part of the group, but not running the show maybe in a way that he thought maybe at some point he would be, if that makes sense. Yeah,
I mean, like I said, he's known the score because he hasn't been given that promotion for 3 years, right? If he thought that he was getting it, then 1 year or 2 years ago, then it would have become clear, right? And so, and I also think a lot about Justin's personal life when I think about his position.
Sure.
He's been in Utah for a long time, recently had a kidney transplant, learned that all of his children have the same genetic variant that he has that leads to the kidney disease that he has. So all of his doctors are in Utah. His children in high school. There's not a lot of personal reason for him to want to leave. And if he's in a position where staying general manager and continuing to have a very lucrative and successful job keeps him in a place where his family are not only happy but healthy, I think that plays a lot more into Justin's decisions and perception on his life than maybe it did even 2 or 3 years ago. And then in addition to that, there are a lot of owners in the NBA who are less willing to spend money and less willing to keep things, to keep continuity. I mean, look at what is happening in New York right now. James Dolan is as fickle as they come and is as horrible as they come, and they're firing Tibbs after he just took the Knicks to the furthest point they've been in over 20 years. And so things could be worse. And I think that, if you're a front office person in the NBA and you're surveying the landscape, there are a lot worse places to be than where Justin Zanuck is right now.
Yeah, and you're good to bring up the personal side. That's something that we fail to do in this space often, so I appreciate that perspective. I like Justin. I'm a Zanuck guy, and so, I just kind of wonder how this is all landing with him. But, yes, we all want to keep our jobs, and I'm sure Justin is in that space as well. So you brought up where I wanted to go next, which is And I'll start here just to to be reductive and reduce it to really what the bottom line is of pro basketball. And that is, if you don't have players, it doesn't matter who your coach is. If you don't have players, it doesn't matter who your front office is. It doesn't matter who your owner is if you don't have players. And the Jazz don't have players. They don't. The Knicks do. But what happened today is another example of why New York has been treading water for 25 years. They have a petulant owner who's impatient and makes irrational decisions without thinking them through. And so where I will give the Jazz credit, and only time will tell if this is the right approach, because, again, if you don't have players, it doesn't matter who your coach is or who your front office is. But what Ryan has elected to do, Will Hardy he's going to receive a 9-year runway, and he's won 30% of his basketball games. Tom Thibodeau was just fired after going to the Eastern Conference Finals and winning 50 games in back-to-back years for the first time in 25, 30 years. So what Ryan has elected to do is like the anti-Dolan approach, and that is lock in a front office, lock in a coach, and let's go. Again, bottom line, you have to have players, and the Jazz don't. But what do you make of that dichotomy, where I perceive to be the wrong approach from James Dolan for years to bring in aging, overpriced players and aren't ready to win, to fire coaches left and right, and it clearly has not worked consistently in New York, and Ryan is taking the opposite approach. What are your thoughts?
I've long been a believer that consistency and continuity when it comes to coaching is really important. It is really hard to look at some of the teams in the NBA and think wow, that's not part of it, right? You look at the turnover in coaching in Phoenix, the turnover in coaching in Milwaukee, the turnover in coaching in Philadelphia, and now New York is going to do it. It's what do they expect that someone else is going to? You think that just the biggest named coach, Budenholzer, Doc Rivers, Nick Nurse, you just rotate those guys in and it's going to fix all the problems? If we're looking at New York, I would say one of their biggest problems is that the Indiana Pacers could have played 13 guys and the Knicks were struggling to play 7, right? Your bench is Landry Shamet. I think that there are problems beyond Tibbs, and Jalen Brunson is the best player on that team, and he seemed like he had all of the confidence in Tibbs, and so I just don't understand why you would cut the legs off at coaching and say that was the problem. That wasn't the problem. The players weren't good enough.
All right, Sarah, before I set you loose and let you get back to beautiful San Diego, have you landed on, and look, of course, it depends on who's drafted before 5, but if the Jazz stay at 5, who at this point do you believe is best case scenario for them to walk away with?
I have gone through probably 5 guys, and I reserve the right to change this in 2 minutes as well as in 10 days, because I feel like that's how often I'm changing my mind on this. Right now, if he was available, my top choice there would be VG Edgecombe. I do really like Trey Johnson. I think at this point, I feel like I'm out on Ace Bailey. I just think that with the 5th pick, you need to have someone that is going to feel like they could be a star, but also if they just turn into a really, really reliable role player, that then you're really happy with that, but they have to have starter potential and a little glimmer of hope for them being a star. And if you're looking at someone who has the best two-way ability there, I think it's VJ, but I think that's what a lot of other people are thinking too, which makes me think he won't be there at 5.
Well, we are a few weeks away. We'll see what the Jazz end up doing, Sarah. Thank you so much for the time. Enjoy San Diego, and we'll chat soon.
All right, chat soon.
Sarah Todd covers Utah Jazz for the Deseret News. She's on social media at NBA Sarah is where you find her. I want to remind you guys, the Live Night Events presents the 2025 Granary Live Concert Series, powered by Nightingale College and Murdoch Hyundai, Utah's #1 Hyundai dealer. Experience outdoor concerts in the heart of downtown Salt Lake's Granary District. Find more details on ESPN700sports.com. Sarah stops by today, courtesy of our friends at IFA Country Stores. When the seasons change, if you're like any good coach, You'll put together your game plan for a healthy green lawn, and you'll turn to the experts at IFA. Check out their 4+ lawn care program. Everything you need to make your yard a hit. It's the ultimate lawn owner power move at IFA and IFA.coop. 1 hour down, 3 hours to go on this Tuesday afternoon. Tim McMahon joins us coming up on the other side. We're going to bring in Pablo Mastroeni and Dave Fox later on. Busy Tuesday show, and it's good to have you with us right here on ESPN 700. Stanley Cup Finals begin tomorrow night. NBA Finals start Thursday night. We are your home for both of those events here on the ESPN Utah Sports Network, so stay tuned for that. Random big, busy NBA news cycle over the past 24 hours. Our next guest, good enough to give us some time. NBA Finals week. Tim McMahon, happy Tuesday, sir. How are you?
Howdy, partner. How you doing?
I'm good. So I see, I see 2 Jordan 11s. I see 2 Jordan 3s. I see a Jordan 4. I think that's a 6. I see 2 Jordan 1s. How many pairs of shoes are you bringing for this NBA Finals trip of yours?
Yeah, you are looking at 10 pairs there. There will be a pair on my feet. Then there will be a pair of running shoes. And there will be some Sabrina 1s. That's what I'm hooping in these days. I can't wear NBA signature shoes, so I got some Sabrinas.
Fair enough. Best Jordans. I did not know you were a sneakerhead, and I am a sneakerhead in recovery. I have a decent, not great collection, but I don't like to spend $600 on shoes anymore. So best Jordans, in your opinion.
I don't spend $600. I like the 3s the best.
Yes.
I am an old school guy. You see a lot of 1s, 3s. I do have some 2s, lows in there. I like the 4s, 5s. Yeah, I'm old school. I'm like back to the childhood type stuff, but 3s are my favorites.
3s is the correct answer. All right, I already buried the lead, Tim, because we actually have a big piece of Jazz news to talk about. Austin Ainge was announced yesterday as the Jazz president of basketball operations, and his father, Danny, the CEO of the Jazz, will report to him. Justin Zanuck, the general manager of the Utah Jazz, will report to him. So there was a lot of clarity in the presser yesterday in a way that, quite frankly, Tim, we have not heard. Even when Danny was hired, it was kind of like he doesn't want to do anything day to day, so he's just going to kind of hang out. Zanuck is going to do most of the groundwork. So we actually have a little bit more clarity with the hierarchy of this front office, more so than we've had in a few years. What's your reaction?
I believe that Danny Ainge is reporting to his son when I see it. But listen, Danny, he's not, like you said, he's not a day-to-day guy. He wasn't handling the trade calls and, down in the nitty-gritty of dealing with the agents and, other GMs and whatnot. That's been Justin Zanuck's job. I think Danny's more of kind of like the senior advisor almost to Ryan Smith. But, obviously people are going to look at this, and I think that there will obviously be the initial reaction of nepotism at work. The one thing I would say is there is not a single executive in the NBA who considers Austin Ainge anything but immensely qualified for a position like this. Like, he was going to be a candidate for other teams. He's obviously been in Boston for a while, been a significant part of building that Celtics championship team. So I do think this is the addition of a strong executive mind to the Jazz's front office, and he will be leading the front office. He ultimately is going to be the top basketball, executive. Probably the last voice in Ryan Smith's ear. So I don't know exactly how. I don't want to speculate on how Justin Zanuck feels about this. This is the second time somebody's been hired over his head by Ryan Smith, but he dealt with it just fine under Danny Ainge. And, I don't know how they'll divvy things up in terms of like trade talks and dealings with agents, et cetera, et cetera. I thought the most interesting thing from the press conference was his answer on the tanking question. And I thought it was a pretty direct answer that still managed to leave some wiggle room, if that makes sense. But, there was as you might expect, a lot of reaction within the Jazz organization when the worst case scenario and also the most likely scenario is what happened in the lottery. And it's not just about the lottery odds, discouraging tanking and those kind of coming into play and, getting smacked with that reality, but the damage that you're doing to player development if you have another season where they take the approach that they did last year.
Yeah, and your point about Danny is a really good one. And look, I've known the Ainges my entire life, and, Danny doesn't need me to stand up for him. And quite frankly, neither does Austin. Austin does have a track record as a basketball decision maker for an organization that's really been the class of the league, among the class of the league for a long time, including the 14/17 years he's been involved there. So their acumen and pedigree speaks for itself. It really does. But the Danny point is interesting, Tim, because I've honestly just wondered how invested he's been in this entire thing at all. And look, he's around, he's at games and he's at workouts and such, but I also know he likes those Riverside tea times. And I also know that he likes spending time with his grandkids. He's not one of those guys that just gives you a face value, hey, I want to spend time with my family answer, then goes and travels to Europe for 6 months out of the year. He's a father and a grandfather, and he is living his life in his later stages in the way that he wants to do it. I wonder if you think Austin's addition could indicate that Danny will even be a little bit more removed than he has been.
You know, and look, it's not like Danny Ainge wanted to go work for the Utah Jazz.
Exactly.
He was recruited by Ryan Smith. And again, I don't necessarily know that this is going to change a lot for Danny because he wasn't doing the day-to-day stuff. You know, he wasn't grinding on the trade calls, and he wasn't, worrying about who they're going to sign to a two-way contract. He wasn't dealing with the agents. That's all been Justin Zanik's job. And so I don't know that this changes a lot for Danny. Again, I'm more curious to know how much will it change for Justin Zanik. But this is by NBA standards, they've had a relatively lean front office. They've also let a couple other people in that front office go this off season. So there still could be some hires to come. And the other thing I think that we should point out is, while Will Hardy wasn't like part of the hiring process for Austin Ames, they do have a relationship. They did work together for a year in Boston. I do know there's a lot of mutual respect there. And I would certainly anticipate that it would be a productive, harmonious head coach, lead executive relationship between those two.
So the Zanuck portion, Tim, okay. So let's be very clear. If you are able to traverse your way into an NBA general manager job, you simply want to keep that job. And it is one of the best jobs that Justin probably ever thought he could get. He was a finalist in Milwaukee. And in fact, I think he actually almost took the job.
No, he was. And then he was like next in line, and I forgot the exact circumstances, but he kind of got shanked in that deal.
Right. And they gave it to Horst, and then Dennis Lindsey moved on, and Jay-Z was elevated to general manager. And, Tim, I know that you said that you don't want to speculate on where his head is at with this, but where's his head at with this?
I haven't talked to him, and I'm not going to put words in a guy's mouth. Jay-Z has always been a very faithful, hardworking employee of the Utah Jazz. I don't know anything that would indicate that would change. The other thing is he's had some extremely serious health issues. Had to get a life-saving transplant. Maybe taking a little bit off his plate would be beneficial to him. But again, that's me getting into speculation that I really don't want to do because I have not had a discussion with him.
So let's go back to what you referenced, and that was Austin's answer as a result of the question asked by our very own Sean O'Connell about the philosophy on tanking. And it was a great soundbite. I've had a lot of people send it to me like, oh, I guess things are changing. But I don't believe it to be true. And it's pretty simple, Tim. Like, there is this top 8 protected first-round pick next year that if the Jazz aren't in the top 8, it goes to the team that's probably about to win the world championship. And then the year after, I believe it conveys to 2 second-rounders, I think, something like that. So
Correct.
next,
You're right.
Okay, so next year is the final time that the bill could come due. And when you are a team that is in such bad need of a talent infusion, you cannot afford to lose a first-round pick that could be, a player that ultimately does hit because they need players that are going to hit. So I understand what Austin said. I don't believe that that's going to be the approach. How do you think they do approach this season based off of the need to hang on to an asset I believe they badly need to hang on to?
Can you read the exact quote to me? Do you have that in front of you?
It was simply Sean asked him his philosophy on tanking, manipulating minutes, in the name of better draft odds, and Austin simply said, "You will not see that this year."
So you might see, and you don't have to call it tanking. You might see long-term transactions that make it even more difficult for the Jazz to put a winning product on the floor next year. Is that tanking, or is that doing what's in the best long-term interest of your franchise? I think, if you take his statement at face value, they're not going to tank by coming up with mythical injuries, okay? They're not going to tank by sitting their better players during the fourth quarters. They're not going to be, I think a fair word is dishonest about trying to, on a night-to-night basis, win basketball games. That doesn't mean that they're going to win a lot of games next year. Now, Will has proven that if you give him NBA caliber talent, that the Jazz will probably win more games under his coaching than you would think, just looking at it on paper. If they're not doing egregious tanking measures, but look at the Western Conference. Tell me which team you realistically think the Jazz are going to be better than next year.
There isn't one.
Okay, I was going to wait.
Yeah, there isn't one.
So look, they went all out to get the worst record in the league last year. They ended up with the 5th pick, which again was the worst case scenario in that situation, and by far the most likely. It's like 47.9% chance that if you have the worst record in the league, that's where you're going to land. So it's not a shock that's where they landed. Now, what did they pay in terms of player development, maybe bad habits kicking in, that sort of thing? How much did they stunt the growth of, recent draft picks that are on that roster that were in that rotation? Those are all questions that need to be discussed internally, much less, on radio shows and whatnot. But I think realistically, they're not going to make win now trades this summer. I mean, that'd just be silly. I think realistically, we're looking at a team that's probably going to still land pretty high in the lottery. Now, if you land 5th or 6th, I'm not looking at the table right in front of me, but to get to your point, the fear isn't necessarily, oh my gosh, we might have 5th or 6th pick in the draft again. It's we might get leapfrogged a couple times, and if you're 7th especially, you might get leapfrogged a couple times, land 9th. That would be a disaster. It would be a total disaster, obviously, in the 9th overall pick to the Oklahoma City Thunder. So there's a lot of gray here, a lot of nuance here. But to just repeat the approach that they took last year, I mean, I think you're kind of giving up on the young guys on the roster if you want to do that.
So if they want to go about their business of losing while being serious about trying to compete, I feel like it means they have to move off of Markkanen and probably Kessler, because if Lowry plays 75 games, if Walker plays 75 games, if Colin Sexton plays 75 games, and John Collins was and your point about Will is absolutely spot on. Okay, with a coach who has shown that he can maximize whatever talent he has if you allow him to maximize it, I see a team that could win 30, 35 games in the West. I don't see a team that's making the playoffs or hanging a banner, but I see a team as presently constituted, and certainly if they draft a kid at 5, they can step in and play right away, and they play all the vets and they do their best to win games. I see a team that can win between 30 and 35 games, which puts you right in that area of potentially not being in the top 7 or top 8, which is the worst possible outcome that we could actually come up with. So if they are going to do the thing where it's like, no, we are going to put our best foot forward and try to compete, I think it means they have to move off of Lowry and probably Walker.
I would agree that, if they reach the conclusion that, hey, we have got, and a reasonable conclusion, we have got to at least be in the top 8, that there's, they need to address some of the win probability issues, to put it politely, via the trade market. And I mean, do you think anybody on that roster is untouchable?
No.
Lowry wasn't untouchable last year. Now, their asking price for Lowry was, I think other teams would say, way too high. Does that come down this year? I don't know. Again, I think those are discussions that need to be had. I don't think the asking price for Sexton or for Collins or for Clarkson is too high. Kessler, to me, that's a tough one, though, because he absolutely is a guy who you could envision as the defensive backbone of a good team, 4 or 5 years down the road. It's not hard to look at Kessler, not as like your franchise player, obviously, but as a piece of a foundation that you can build upon. So that one's tougher for me.
I agree with you. I love Walker. I love Lowry. Lowry's good, man. Like, I'm just trying to understand how this thing can work with the long-term game in mind, because to your earlier point, Tim, they're a marathon away from the better teams in the Western Conference. I mean, Chris Finch, after the Minnesota loss, he's like, hey, there are 13 teams in the West. They're going to be trying to compete for home court. And it's like, oh, okay, so it's probably the Jazz and the Blazers that aren't. But because they're so far away, part of me believes they're probably going to look at some of this stuff and keep the mindset of we are 3, 4, 5 years away from being able to compete with the top teams, and maybe that does make Walker expendable. Even though I agree with you, that's a tough decision to make because he's been so good.
Yeah, and again, like they would listen to him last year, but they were asking for at least a couple of first-round picks.
Yeah,
and and then like you get into the discussions around that. What are the quality of picks? Blah blah blah. The Lowry thing's also interesting to me because, honestly, if you were going to trade him, was he more or less valuable in the trade market before you gave him a full-blown max contract?
Good point. Yeah, good point.
And I don't know. And I don't know what his value would be in the trade market now. I do think it's like Austin Ainge has to find out. Doesn't mean he has to trade him, but he has to find out what the value is. And I'm not sure. And, and just like you can't really evaluate Markkanen's performance last year. I mean, it was such a weird situation. They had nothing to play for. They were clearly tanking. He was out of the lineup every couple games just because they're like, hey, if you play, we might actually win this one. But he had a bad year. I don't know, man. I think some teams might have trouble figuring out what his value would be.
So, with the news today that the New York Knicks have moved off of Tom Thibodeau, after going to the Eastern Conference Finals, after winning 50 games in back-to-back years, making the playoffs for the last 5. The last 3 years, the most playoff wins belong to Boston, Denver, and New York is third. It's another example of an impulsive owner who'd rather play the kazoo for his dumb band than actually continue to build something that means something. And so where I think, and look, to be fair, only time will tell if this is going to work. But bottom line is you need players. Knicks have players, the Jazz don't. But what Ryan has elected to do is kind of the anti-Dolan approach. And Will Hardy, who's won 34% of his games, is under contract forever. And now he's locked in his front office, guys that, I believe will be around for a long, long time. Only time will tell if this is the right approach. And the bottom line is you do need players, but Ryan has elected to believe in the people he's hired and give them stability moving forward and playing the long game to try to build this thing,
I think good ownership is hiring good people and trusting them to do their job and supporting them without meddling. Jim Dolan is not a good owner. He's just not. The Knicks have been good the last 4 years. Leon Rose, I would say, has done a good job, all things considered. But I mean, I don't understand firing Tibbs here. And there had been noise about his job maybe being in jeopardy for really going back months now for a lot of the season. But after an Eastern Conference Finals berth, and I don't know, maybe I would hope they know who their next hire is going to be. I don't know that. I've not even heard really informed speculation on that yet. But just firing Tibbs and then like figuring it out on the fly, that doesn't seem to be a good plan. Now, good luck getting any idea of what their actual plan might be, because you know what the Jazz do, and almost every team in the league does it with the exception of one. When they make a major decision, they have the people who made the decision hold a press conference where they can be asked about things, where they can explain why, where they can explain their vision. The Knicks don't do that at all, and I don't understand that either. There's a lot of things I don't understand about the Knicks, but you're in the midst of your most successful run in at least a quarter of a century, and then you say you need to get a new voice. Okay. And honestly, I really don't even want to hear from Leon Rose or Jim Dolan. What I really want to get is Jalen Brunson's honest thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, for sure. He was asked about Coach Thibodeau after Game 6, and I thought he gave a really supportive, salient answer. I wonder how much of this, and this is, I guess it was Haberstroh hopped on yesterday and pointed out, because I asked Tommy yesterday, what does the offseason look like in New York? Because I think they've got a Cat problem. And the Cat conundrum is interesting because there's so much to like about his game. And then he doesn't close out, doesn't guard. You can put him in pick and roll, and he looks like he's never done it before. And Tom brought up this whole Leon Rose, World Wide West, Karl Anthony Towns, CAA relationship that had gone back to Kentucky, basically. And there's a case to be made that this is the second time maybe Cat wasn't thrilled for playing for Tom. He played for him in Minnesota, too. Is there anything there? I mean, you bring up the Jalen portion, and Jalen is more important than Cat is. He just is to the Knicks. But do you think there's anything with this Cat thing that, is a theory that's being thrown around?
The thought crossed my mind. Definitely crossed my mind, and I'll be honest with you. When they traded for Cat, one of the first things that I wondered was, how is that going to work with Tibbs? Because it was not pretty in Minnesota. I've reached out to some people to try to get some clarity there. I don't have that right now, so I don't want to get too far out, kind of over my skis. But, definitely the thought crossed my mind. I'll also say this. There are people in Minnesota who think that the Knicks traded for Cat as a stepping stone to make another trade. So, it'll be interesting to see. There's going to be a whole lot of big splashes made this summer. It'll be interesting to see if Cat's part of another one or if he's back in New York next year.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think they were ahead of schedule by making the Eastern Conference Finals. But I think if they have premonitions of going beyond it, they've got serious, issues with their roster. They don't have depth either. I mean, a lot of people are saying, and I said this too, because Cat and Jalen and everybody, they just look gassed in the fourth. So I talked to you about, can you find 10 minutes for DeLon Wright or Precious Achiuwa? But their bench is bad. I understand why Tom looks down his bench and is like, I've got to play these guys. They're so much better. Do you think they move off of Cat? I mean, you think that's a realistic thing and try to reformulate something different?
I think it would have to be an awfully big splash for that to happen. But we will see. I will say this. I've talked to people in the Knicks front office, and kind of the joke there is, why do we go through all this trouble looking for players knowing that Tibbs isn't going to play but 7 anyway?
Yeah,
so
that's fair.
You can kind of chicken and egg that all you want, but their depth was not. They did not have quality depth. And listen, I think Mikal Bridges is a very good player. Certainly giving up 5 picks for him was a questionable move.
What stood out most, and maybe we need to talk about, well, you know this because you covered him. I mean, Rick Carlisle he's so good, and it's been interesting listening to him after both the Knicks series and the Cavs series, just kind of say, we're flying right now. Like, these teams just ran into a group that's what stood out most about the way the Pacers were able to figure it out. They started 10-15. And your thoughts on the fact that Rick Carlisle, once again, is back in the NBA Finals with a roster that nobody thought had a chance?
Yeah, I think just what stands out the most to me is just how unique their style of play is and how good they are at it and how well suited their personnel is for it. Like, they play fast and it's wide open spaces and it's perfectly tailored to Tyrese Halliburton. And, I see the roots of this whole thing in the Mavericks 2011 championship season when Kidd handed the keys over to Jason Kidd and kind of really adapted and changed his offensive philosophy. And this is like an extreme version of that, where Rick's not calling plays. He has created a system and a scheme, and he's trusting a brilliant offensive playmaker to run it at extraordinarily fast pace. And it's working wonders. And I tell you what, man, I scratched my head about Tibbs getting fired, but it was just appalling how horrible the Knicks' transition defense was in that series.
Mm-hmm.
How many times did the Knicks score, and 3 or 4 seconds later, Pascal Siakam just ran a go route and he's laying it up on the other end?
For sure.
Like, how many fast breaks were there? And give the Pacers a lot of credit for that, too. But, like, my goodness, how many fast breaks can a team have off of a made bucket? But, again, that's just like the Pacers are relentless and very well constructed to run that style of offense, from the quarterback, to all the other guys, Siakam in particular, but the other guys as well, who were spacing the floor and finishing plays.
All right, Tim, before I set you loose, there is a finals that still has to be played. We've already launched into so many dramatic offseason storylines that we forget starting Thursday, Oklahoma City and Indianapolis will do battle for the right to be the NBA champ. It feels hard, almost impossible for anybody to slow down this OKC train based off of what they've done all year, quite frankly, 29-1 against the East. Can Indiana make it interesting, do you think?
Rick Carlisle would have to pull the kind of miracle that he did in 2011 when he outcoached Eric Spoelstra. Not saying he can't do it, but saying it's going to be tough.
All right, man. Well, enjoy the trip. I'm glad you have accurate and enough footwear, and I'm glad I've learned this information about you today. Good insight on the show, and we'll chat soon. Thanks, Tim.
Appreciate it. Adios, amigos.
All right. Tim McMahon covers the NBA for ESPN, covers the Jazz. He's the Jazz guy for the worldwide leader. At ESPN_McMahon is where you find him on Twitter. He did write a book about Luka Doncic called Luka Doncic and the Curse of Greatness. And the links are up on his Twitter page at ESPN_McMahon. Tim stops by today, courtesy of our good friends at IFA Country Stores. Summer vacations and warmer weather are just beyond the horizon. As the days grow longer and brightly colored flowers begin making their appearance, it's time to start planning and applying Step 2 of IFA's 4+ annual lawn care program. Designed with a vital blend of macro and micronutrients, IFA's Step 2 fertilizer promotes strong roots and vibrant colors in your yard at IFA and IFA.coop. All right, we're going to bring in Pablo Mastroeni, the head coach of RSL. We also have Dave Fox a little bit later on. So a busy Tuesday show, and it's good to have you with us right here on ESPN 700. All right, we're going to bring in Pablo Mastroeni today, the head coach of RSL, during the 4 o'clock hour. RSL is on a 7-match winless streak. Feels like this could be a lost season. I'm sure Pablo will disagree, but we'll talk about the progress of the team. The LA Galaxy had not won a game yet this year, and they smoked RSL 2-0 last week. So we'll do a little soccer with Pablo today. Dave Fox rolls by later on. I'll be on TV with Dave tonight at 10:35. We call it 5 Questions with Spence. Big news of the day today is the New York Knicks have fired Tom Thibodeau after the best run the team has had in literally 25 years. So a lot of NBA news. Austin Ainge's press conference yesterday has been a big topic of conversation throughout the course of the news cycle in the market. And we have the NBA Finals beginning on Thursday night between Oklahoma City and Indiana. Stanley Cup Finals tomorrow. Edmonton, Florida, a rematch of a barn burner of a series last year for the right to lift Lord Stanley's Cup. We're just a few weeks away from the NBA draft and also the NHL draft. Of course, the Utah Hockey Club. Utah Mammoth, I'll get there, receiving better luck in year one of their existence in our market than the Utah Jazz have in basically 50 years. So we'll have some good draft coverage for you guys, both NHL and NBA style, as we kind of wait to see what this offseason is going to look like. Some good stuff from Sarah Todd today, who stopped by earlier. Tim McMahon from ESPN was our guest as well, as the conversation surrounding the Utah Jazz now turns to the offseason. Porter, I've not heard from you on this, so I'm gonna pose this to you the way I posed it to Tim, okay? So if we operate off the premise that what Austin Ainge said yesterday in response to Sean's question about his philosophy on tanking, when he said that you will not see that this year, if that's going to be the approach, what do they need to do in order to make sure this roster is simply comprised of players that you are willing to play when they're healthy every night, at the same time understanding the dynamic in play that if you do win 30 to 35 basketball games, and coming up next May, we're all in front of our couches watching Mark Tatum pull out lottery picks again, and he says with the 9th pick in the 2026 NBA draft, the selection goes to the Utah Jazz, which means it actually goes to the Oklahoma City Thunder. That is worst case scenario. With where the Jazz are at right now in this project, in this long game rebuild, losing a top 10 pick to the team in the West you are already looking up to on every single level would be a catastrophic misstep. It just would. I'm going to pose it to you the way I posed it to Tim. If you want to hold on to your draft pick and also approach the season with integrity and not be unserious about winning, I think you have to move on from Lowry and Walker. I really do.
You have to move on from a good share of your remaining roster. Now, you could talk me into holding on to one of those pieces, and frankly, Spence, moving on from some of the younger pieces that you're maybe not entirely sold on. You could obviously move on from expiring contracts and the John Collins situation. That's one where you got to assume he's gonna take that player option. So it leaves the Jazz with not all that many options, but yeah, they would have to move on from a good share of their rotation players in order to kind of toe that line and still avoid the situation that you just laid out, Spence, which is worst case scenario. There is really no circumstance where you can, in good faith, give Will Hardy this roster and say, hey, go do your thing, and then win 33 games and lose your top 10 pick. That's something you can't let happen. And I don't think the Jazz are going to allow that to happen, but there does seem to be an MO in the front office that changed yesterday, if you take them for what they say face value.
So one of the interesting things to watch out for, based off of the conversations we've been having, is Walker Kessler is extension eligible, okay? So I keep pointing to the summer of 2026 as opposed to this offseason because the Jazz could potentially have over $70 million in cap space in 2026. Okay, so there's a $14.6 million free agent cap hold for Walker next season. But they could extend him this offseason. However, do you want to extend him if you plan on moving him? It would be a lot easier to trade him if you didn't extend him. And also, how does that land with Walker? Now, remember, and by the way, I want to be clear. I've never received information to corroborate what I'm about to say, but it is a narrative that's been out there ever since Hayward left for Boston, that when the Jazz told Gordon, we are not extending you, you're going to play out the final year of your rookie deal, and then you go bet on yourself. And if you can go get a max deal, then we'll decide if we want to match it, which, by the way, is completely within the rights of the organization. It's just not really a gesture of goodwill for a player that you really want around. And there are a lot of people that believe when the Jazz elected not to sign Hayward to the extension when he was eligible, that was the beginning of the end. That was the beginning of the wheels going down the road where Gordon didn't feel appreciated, didn't feel like the Jazz wanted him. So he goes and gets his offer sheet from Charlotte. The Jazz matched it, which meant Gordon was here for another 4 years. And then, of course, Gordon stayed, turned into a really good player. He was an all-star. I think a lot of people forget how good Gordon was here during his last season playing for Quinn. So the Jazz elect not to extend Hayward. Plays for the team, gets the max offer sheet from Charlotte. The Jazz matched that offer sheet. Gordon is here for another 4 years. There are a lot of people that draw a straight line between the decision not to extend him and Gordon's decision to leave. I don't know if I believe that, but a lot of people do. My whole thing with that has always been he wanted to go play for his college coach, and he wanted to sit at a different lunch table, and he wanted to play in a bigger market. He wanted to be a guy that was known as a star for a team like the Celtics instead of a team like the Jazz. I don't know how much of his decision to leave had to do with the Jazz decision not to extend him, but there are people that believe that to be true. So this Walker thing is interesting, and I think it becomes more interesting based off of Austin Ainge's comments yesterday. Because if you're going to hold on to your draft pick, which you have to do, in my opinion, as you're trying to piece together a team and build a team, certainly in a city like Salt Lake that does have complications, no matter what the spin is from the team, it does have complications. We have several examples of players that the Jazz have literally acquired that have been like, I'm not going to live there. I don't want to play there. Like, it's happened multiple times over the years. It just has. The Jazz have been able to bring in free agents in the past that have worked out. So it's not like it's never worked, okay? But if the Jazz want to hold on to their pick, a top 8 protected pick that goes to Oklahoma City. So it's very simple. If you're listening, like, what is he talking about? If the Jazz are not in the top 8 next year, their draft pick conveys to Oklahoma City. It's the Derek Favors trade. It is this bill that's always become due. But after next year, it goes to a situation where it would be 2 second-round picks that are conveyed to Oklahoma City. And you can stomach that. I mean, certainly there are several examples, both locally and around the NBA, of plenty of second-round picks that have been awesome. The best player in the world right now was a second-round pick in Nikola Jokic. You would prefer to keep your capital, but you certainly could stomach sending a couple of second-round picks to Oklahoma City as opposed to like the 9th or the 10th pick in the draft, where they took Taylor, where they took Cody. So in my opinion, in this process of trying to build a team, you have to do it through the draft. And then once you've been able to do it through the draft, you can attract other players that might want to come play with some of the good young players you have. It's why the Cooper Flags thing does sting. San Antonio, which is not an appealing market in the NBA, Chris Paul signs to play with Wembanyama. De'Aaron Fox, green light to trade to play with Victor Wembanyama. Like, you get a Victor Wembanyama, you get a Cooper Flag, you start to build, and people around the league see what you're building, and then agents are more inclined to talk about their clients playing for you because you have something. Right now, the Jazz have nothing. Nobody's watching Isaiah Collier and calling their agent and be like, dude, I want to go play with that kid. So in this process, where even though the Jazz have a really good head coach signed for a long time, and a front office with a pedigree that speaks for itself, locked in for a long time, you got to have players. You have to have horses. It doesn't matter who your coach is if you don't have horses. It doesn't matter who your front office is if you don't have players. It doesn't matter who your owner is if your roster is void of talent. So in order to continue to build, the draft pick next year, to me, has to be basically your first priority. So if you're going to dance this dance where Austin Ainge says we're no longer tanking, that's off the table, and you're going to stay away from holding players out when they're healthy, which the Jazz were literally fined for last year, $100,000. And if you're going to stay away from, okay, you want us to play our guys? Well, Walker Kessler is shooting 7 threes a night now. If you're going to no longer be unserious about competing and actually approach the thing with some integrity and hold on to your pick, Walker might have to go because he's that good. And Lowry might have to go because he's that good. Like, I see a roster right now that, and we'll see what happens with the draft picks. They have the potential of adding 4 draft picks to the team. They're going to have some decisions to make on some of these players if they're going to add 4 new rookies to the team. And we'll get to an interesting dynamic involving some of the young players in just a minute. But if essentially you run it back with a top 5 pick, maybe it's VJ Edgecombe, maybe it's Trey Johnson, and 21st overall pick, and again, first-round picks are guaranteed. They're going to be on your team. There are already cap holds in place with the Bobby Marks breakdowns, and then we'll see what happens with the second-rounders or undrafted guys. And Walker Kessler plays 70, 75 games, and Lauri Markkanen plays 70, 75 games, and Colin Sexton is playing every night. I think it's probably time to say thank you, Jordan Clarkson, but his best years, quite frankly, have been over for a while. I'll throw John Collins, who in stretches was actually the best player on the team last year. So if Walker Kessler, Lauri Markkanen, John Collins, Colin Sexton, if those 4, we'll say those 4 vets, if they play 70 to 75 games, and Isaiah builds on a solid rookie campaign, and Keontae decides he wants to watch tape and learn how to play defense, and Taylor comes back and he's healthy, and Cody, shows a pulse, and Filipowski shows that last year was not an aberration, I see a team that can win 35 games in the NBA next year. And that puts you directly in peril of losing your pick. What I'm saying is it's not possible for them to do both with the way the team is constructed now. So based off of what Austin said yesterday, I've got to imagine they're making phone calls about Lowry. I've got to imagine they're willing to take phone calls on Walker. Walker's a tough one to let go. Because honestly, between the Rudy and Donovan trades, they have not aged as well as people thought that they would. Now, the jury's still out because there are plenty of picks that have to convey. The best player you got for Donovan Mitchell, who at the time was a 25-year-old superstar player just entering his prime, was Lowry. He was very good. Obaji played pretty well for Toronto, didn't really work here for whatever reason. Colin Sexton has been solid, right? He's a guy that at least brings energy and plays hard every night, and when he gets going offensively, he can get some things happening. He's not a great defensive player either. The Jazz are so small with the guards they elect to play. Like when you watch the finals, watch the wing players from Indiana and Oklahoma City. They're all like 3 or 4 inches taller than any of the wing players on the Jazz roster. They need length and athleticism on the perimeter to provide some defensive pushback. Remember, the Jazz have not just been the worst defensive team in pro basketball for the past 2 years. They've been like historically bad. And they've got a great rim protector. What does that tell you? The guards, it's the perimeter players. It's guys on the wings that are bad at point of attack. They're not big enough to bother other opposing players. That's got to change. So the Walker thing is tough. But again, he's too good, and so is Markkanen and Collins at times, and Sexton at times. These guys are good NBA veteran players that if you let them play 70 to 75 games, you will not be in a position to have a top 8 draft pick, which you badly need next year. More so than anything else, that has to be your priority. Because if you give yourself another bite of the apple, maybe the Dallas Maverick luck or the San Antonio Spurs luck finally shines on you. And the A.J. Debance kid you guys are going to watch at BYU is generationally special. And if the Jazz are able to make that happen, then we have a different conversation about all of it. If they were able to move up to 1 this year, we have a different conversation about all of it. That's all you need. One bolt of lightning, one ping pong ball bouncing your way changes the entire direction of your project. So you have to put yourself in a position to capitalize on where you are in the process to make sure you keep the assets you need to keep building. And that has to mean Markkanen's on the table. It has to mean Walker's on the table. It has to mean, quite frankly, everyone's on the table. And then you kind of see where you go. One more thing before we catch a break, because this is interesting. Bobby Marks sent out his offseason guide today for the Jazz, and he outlined where the Jazz are at with their economic model currently in a spreadsheet. Next year could be, I'm not saying is, but next year the Jazz have, so next year the following players technically are on the clock. And I'll tell you why. So next year, Taylor Hendricks has a $6.1 million number. That's his money, and it's guaranteed. It's fully guaranteed all year. The year after next, so 2026, 2027, the Jazz have a team option on Taylor for $7.8 million. Next year, Cody Williams, $5.7 million. The Jazz have a team option the year after that on Cody for $6 million. Walker is under contract with a guarantee. I referenced his cap hold earlier. So his cap hold in 2026, 2027 is 14.6. As I referenced earlier, they could extend him this offseason. But part of me feels like they're not going to do that because if you extend him and pay him what he deserves, quite frankly, it'll make him harder to trade. It'll make him harder to move. They might just do what they did with Hayward and say you're playing out the final year of the deal and then take calls to try to move him. Keontae George on the books for $4.2 million next year. The year after, you guessed it, team option. $6.4 million. Bryce Sensabaugh on the books, $2.6 million next year. Team option year after, $4.8 million. Isaiah Collier on the books, $2.6 million. Team option, $2.7 million the year after that. Meaning this, Taylor, Cody, Keontae, Bryce, and Isaiah are on the clock next year. It's a massive year for all 5 of those players because the year after, the Jazz have team options, and they own the decision as to whether or not these guys continue to develop in this ecosystem or they go play somewhere else. Some of them might not even be NBA guys. Some of them might be G League guys or overseas guys. Honestly, there's a world that exists where Isaiah Collier and Keontae George, the 2 young guards that Jazz fans seem to be somewhat excited about, do not even make Oklahoma City's roster. I'm serious. Go look at it. First of all, tell me who they play in front of. Cason Wallace is like the 8th man on OKC's roster. He's light years ahead of both those players. So bottom line is this. There are miles to go with talent additions on the roster that are badly needed to make this thing relevant. And if you're going to go all in on being serious about competition next year and maintain the ability to keep your draft capital, we could see a roster that is stripped down by Austin Ainge this offseason. All right, 2 hours down, 2 hours to go. We'll shift gears and we'll do a little RSL. It's been 7 matches of no wins, a 7-match winless streak. Dave Fox will roll by later on. We'll do a little college football with Dave. Utah football making some inroads with their 2026 recruiting class. I'll be on TV with Dave tonight at 10:35 on KMYU. We call it 5 questions with Spence. So 2 hours down, 2 hours to go. Keep it right here on The Drive with Spence Checketts on ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. We are proud to be part of Utah's ESPN radio network. Vegas has already released odds for the next head coach of the New York Knicks. That is so wild. It says Mike Malone. It's supposed to be Michael Malone. We're not supposed to call him Mike Malone. Michael Malone, your favorite, 1-1. Then it's Jay Wright, Jeff Van Gundy. I wonder if Jeff would even take that phone call. Then some others, including Rick Brunson, Jalen's dad. I wonder if he's going to be able to hang on to that job he got. So there you go. We'll get back to some NBA, but time now for some soccer. Been excited for this all day when I saw his name on the rundown. Let's welcome in the head coach over at Salt Lake, Pablo Mastroeni, on a Tuesday afternoon. Pobs, my guy, so good to talk to you. Happy Tuesday.
Sorry to disappoint you.
Oh, no. Oh, no. Is it Trey? We got Trey today?
Is.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry. Pablo sends his regrets.
Is he dodging me?
No, he says he'd be happy to get on with you another time this week, but he's literally been in a 3-hour meeting trying to obviously get some things moving ahead, moving forward, getting things done.
Yeah, and some things have to move forward. Real quick, do you feel better about your Denver Nuggets since it's been the only team in the West that made OKC even kind of uncomfortable?
No moral victories. I mean, am I proud of how they withstood the onslaught that is the OKC Thunder and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, sometimes known as Shameless Grifter Alexander? Yeah, but the Nuggets just have so many problems and issues of their own. It's kind of a hollow victory, I guess.
Let me follow up real quick. You said no moral victories, right?
I did say that.
All right, moving over to our local soccer club that has gone 7 matches now without a win. Look, man, I love you guys. I want to give you space here and try to support the endeavor and try to spin things as positive as I possibly can. Trey, I think this is as bad as it's been in a number of years. Is that kind of the sentiment over there with the club?
Certainly from a results perspective, yeah. The last 7-game winless run was in 2016 at the tail end of the Jeff Cassar era. For those who participated in Pablo's post-game media Zoom on Saturday, you could sense the frustration. But, Pablo's been very consistent for the last, I don't know, man, couple months. And I think he does honestly feel like the performances have been there, but it is moments like he always says, and whether it's a mistake in the back, an unlucky bounce, a bad refereeing decision, or just a lack of quality in the attacking third, we're, box to box, he's pretty pleased. But that game the other night, I know it was a rough watch, and there's no Glad and no Emeka and no Diogo, and you can make excuses, and you got a lot of kids out there, and Noel Calliskin had been left on an island with Joseph Paintsill all night, and on one particular occurrence, he makes a play on the ball, and the ball squirts back to Joseph's feet, and he's a world-class player, and he gets the goal. So it's frustrating, but I think the encouraging thing for somebody like me that's been through this a million times, it feels like, is that we have 17 games left. You have 20 games left if you count Leagues Cup, maybe a few more. And the guys are still together, but clearly the summer window that opens July 24th, and we don't have a lot of games in June, so there is some time. That LAFC game on June 25th is going to get moved likely to September because of their participation in the Club World Cup. So things are kind of going to be backloaded, and they're going to be home loaded basically from July 1st on. So I think there's an opportunity, but there's just no margin for error either.
Does that mean you guys will have 2 games in the month of June?
That is correct. June 14th at home when we honor Nick Raimondo, and June 28th in Kansas City. And that is because the league is taking some international breaks for both the Club World Cup and the Gold Cup.
Jeez. Well, that gives you a lot of time to reflect, a lot of time to train. Bill Simmons has this theory that started in 1999. He calls it the Patrick Ewing theory, and it's predicated on the 1999 New York Knicks, where Patrick Ewing got hurt, and then somehow, some way, Marcus Camby figured out how to play center at a high level. Larry Johnson, Spree, Allen Houston. That group went to the NBA Finals even though Ewing was hurt. So he has this Patrick Ewing theory where at times your best player gets hurt or is unavailable, and the group just finds a way to kind of come together. And the collective effort of the group without the star player is something at times that can manifest results that nobody sees coming. Our guy CK, Chris Camerani on the program, has had this walking line this year. When I ask him, what does RSL do well? He says they Diego Luna well, and that's about it. So Diego makes his way to the U.S. men's national team for the World Cup. How long is he going to be gone, Trey?
He's going to be gone depending how the U.S. does. I can see him being gone until July 10th, let's say.
All right, so you're going to play at least 4, maybe 5 matches without Diego. And even if it's not Diego scoring, he creates most of the chances. Our guy, Big Willie Goals, shout out to Big Willie, got his first goal, but it was due to the service of Diego. He has been everything and sometimes the only thing in the attack for this club. How do you make up for his absence?
It's going to be hard. Obviously, you're going to be missing Dominic Marchuk during this month of June, as well as Diego Luna. Gozo and Ari Piol, they are in international duty right now, but they'll be back for the 14th. Diogo Gonçalves, who, has been hurt and out, he will be back on the 14th. So you're going to have to find a way to do something without the gravity and quality that Diego Luna provides. And could it be Willie? Could it be Ari? Could it be young Aiden Hazarkani, who made his debut, 17-year-old? Our best 2 players this year have been probably Gozo and Luna, and 18 and a 21-year-old. So you do need some veterans to step up. Johnny Russell presumably will be fit and able to contribute more minutes. He had his longest stint of his brief tenure so far on Saturday night in L.A. So it is going to take a committee because, nobody's walking through that door for at least another, 6 weeks.
I'm down, Rick Pitino. All right, because you referenced Diogo, and Jason on the show last week broke the news that Diogo was left off the road trip that included Austin and L.A., but it was not because of health. It was because of disciplinary reasons. You guys, I don't think, have announced anything official. Can you shed some light on what happened?
Yeah, basically, in his first training session back, I think Pablo was kind of disappointed with how, let's say, maybe a lack of vigor that Diogo was taking his rehab and his approach to healing and getting back into the mix. And Pablo made the decision to leave him home. So disciplinary may have been a strong word. It was kind of internal, I guess, if you want to look at it that way. It was really just Pablo's disappointment. And Diogo trained last week with the Monarchs. By all accounts, he had a great attitude, and he fought through it well, and he was back with RSL today, and he'll train with RSL obviously like the next 2 weeks and get ready for the 14th.
Well, I mean, let's stay in this space for a moment because to me, in my opinion, Trey, the next few matches will say a lot about Diogo. And my hope is he looks at the current situation, understands that he is literally the only designated player on the roster, and realizes that Diego's gone for a minute and the other pieces you referenced are gone for a minute. This could be his time to actually finally step up and say, no, I am not this disappointment that everybody believes that I am right now. And let's be clear, everybody believes that he is right now. I mean, I'm sure there's quote unquote internal belief in what he could be, but at some point, man, you just roll your eyes at that stuff and say, show me during a game, please, that you want to earn your paycheck. Like, this could be an opportunity for him. You know what I mean?
Yep. I think you're absolutely right, Spence. And I think, we're going to find out what he's made of, right? Does he want to come back with a chip on his shoulder and Diego gone, like you said, and be like, hey, guys, I'm the man. I'm the number 10. Follow me. And that's what I think everybody wants to see. I do think the locker room still believes in him as a human and as people have not abandoned him in that locker room. So hopefully we see the manifestation of that, obviously, on the 14th.
All right.
Beyond.
Yeah,
all things considered.
no, for sure. And look, if he is as bright as Pablo says he is, and as you say he is, and Kurt and everybody else, if he really has that skill set, maybe it does just take one or two matches where finally something clicks, and he's been over in MLS for over a year now, and he gets what it's like to play in this league. Like if he does have the skill set you guys claim that he has, maybe it is a scenario where one or two games where things are going through him and it actually works could be a conduit to the rest of the year. I guess that's an optimistic way of looking at it, but that's not nothing.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think everybody from Pablo, Kurt, Jason, the assistant coaches, the staff in the locker room, I think everybody does have that belief. Clearly, nobody is more disappointed in maybe, let's call it, a lack of production. What is he? He's probably played 24 games since arriving. I think he scored 3 goals. And it's been a tough go, and not just for him, for the whole club. And, I think the great thing about the culture under Pablo is the lack of internal finger pointing, right? People don't blame each other. And this was the discussion inside the locker room Saturday night after a very disappointing loss to the Galaxy. And it started with Pablo delivering the message, and it was other guys stepping up and talking. But everybody was like, look, we just got to look in the mirror and figure out how to give 1% more, because I think, Saturday was maybe a drop-off in quality as a viewer and as a fan from the Wednesday game against Austin, which clearly ended with a little bit of a 90th minute heartbreak with that goal conceded. But Saturday's Galaxy game, as probably a rough watch that it was for the fans, the sports performance coach or whatever, he put out a note to the group yesterday saying that the outputs, so the ground covered, the sprints, just the physical exertion, was the highest of the year. And I think there's positives in that. It's not the be-all, end-all, obviously. But, we had guys come in and fill in for Glad and Emeka and other guys that were missing, and they worked their tails off. And so that's got to be, I guess, the foundation to kind of build on as you turn the page into the second half of the MLS season. And even though it's been ugly, there's a glut of teams in the Western Conference that are all right there within a couple games. And if we can put a run together, 8 out of 10 at home, I understand we've not been great at home previously this year, but, over the long haul, it has been home cooking has been healing for us. And so I think that's really going to be the focus for the group as we go from June 14th to August 6th, playing 8 out of 10 games at home, adding hopefully another DP and maybe another high-level player, depending on how the roster construct goes during the summer window. And I think there's a lot of. I don't think the optimism or the hope is false, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. I mean, everybody's dealing in reality. Everybody understands that the results have not been good enough. But I think Pablo is very good about trying to figure out how to not throw the baby out with the bathwater, if you will.
All right, so I've asked Pablo, Jason, and Kurt the following question, and I'm going to pose it to you. Chicho Arango, 17 goals, 12 assists last year. Andres Gomez, 13 goals, 9 assists. Anderson Julio, 9 goals, 3 assists. Matt Crooks, 3 goals, 5 assists. So what is fair? Because you've heard the criticism. You're as online as anybody, including my 14-year-old teenage nephew.
Thank you.
You hear from fans. You probably hear from media. You probably hear on this show that I view it as a failure of whatever. I don't know exactly where to aim here. I'm not going to put out an Insta poll on my Twitter to have people vote on whose fault this is. But it has been a failure to not bring in reinforcements juxtaposed to all of the talented attacking players you guys either sold or traded. Why? What happened? I'm not a who's to blame guy. So I'll ask you the same way I asked Jason. What's fair to say about the inability of ownership, the front office, talent evaluators, what have you, to replace potentially the most exciting attacking group, honestly, that we may have ever had here last year?
Yeah, no, look, it's a fair question, right? And I think you start by saying for the 88th time, right? Like there was no way to not do the Andres Gomez deal. Clearly, the Chicho situation, nobody anticipated the lack of production in the second half of last season. I think you can say that when the reinforcements were brought in last August, and that's Dominic Marchuk, Lachlan Brook, Diogo Gonçalves, and Javane Brown, and Javane clearly not an attacker, but the other three are, that the anticipated assimilation and goal and assist production from those players in place of Andres, that has not come to fruition. I think there's other, Gozo might be a bonus, but there were people that wanted Pablo to play Gozo a year ago. And Gozo wasn't ready. Gozo was running between Academy, Monarchs, U.S. Youth National Team. So he had a very frazzled kind of 2024, but clearly we're seeing the benefit of that now. I think, there's no one silver bullet that could have fixed all that goal production and all that productivity that you just outlined, not just Chicho and Andres, but Crooks for sure, Anderson, Julio. Clearly, the Elias Manuel trade with New York did not work out as anticipated. The timing of Elias saying, I object to being traded from New York to anywhere else in MLS, that came at a time that was very difficult for us to find a suitable replacement to go into CONCACAF. Then you had the Bozanic deal fall apart on deadline day, and you end up with Willie Agata and Johnny Russell that week. So again, I don't know that Kurt or Jason or Pablo, and they've talked about this publicly, where the guys that have come in, none of them are a like-for-like Chicho replacement. Many of them can still be very much a Julio replacement. And so that really pushes our chips towards the summer window, which opens July 24th. Hopefully some guys get done and they're here and they're training for a full month before they are eligible to play on the 26th, I think, which is Chicho's homecoming to America First Field in Sandy. And they're ready to hit the ground running. That I think is what Kurt and Pablo and Jason and Tony and the group are trying to get done right now for the summer.
So if and I've talked about this on a couple of different occasions. So if the information that was out there is you guys were close to getting other players across the line during the primary transfer window. So if that's the case, it should be realistic to expect players across the line quickly when the summer window opens. And I believe that gives you 13 matches. And some of that is Leagues Cup, right? So that's enough time to salvage something. But in the meantime, you've got to tread water and start getting some points. So you don't have to win your final 7 matches, which you won't do anyway. Does it feel like this season is already lost, Trey? Does it feel like this season is already lost?
I've heard you say that. I've heard Camerani say that. I disagree with you guys. I mean, there's 17 regular season games left. In a row, you shoot right up the standings. So look, again, not lost, a ton of margin for error is, I guess, how I would put it. I'm very optimistic in the talent in the locker room, the cohesion, and maybe adding a couple difference makers. Hopefully Emeka Nelly is back in 4 weeks and not 12, which is kind of stress reaction and trying to avoid a stress fracture back there, in his 5th metatarsal on his right foot. So, look, I'm not going to say it's lost. I think there's a lot of motivation in that group to try to reclaim some consistency. And and not just be quality box to box, but be quality on the defensive end in front of Cabral, who's been amazing this year. Brian Vera's back. He looks to be full strength again. And then in the attacking end, we got to score goals. We've been shut out too many times, and that's where the frustration clearly, as a contrast to where we were a year ago through 17 games with Chicho on fire and Andres earning the transfer to France.
All right, before I set you loose, another interesting dynamic of multiple different interviews I've done is Pablo joining the show and saying that he's been informed by ownership that this whole ethos of developing and selling players is no longer the thing. They do not want to necessarily sell a young player who has a bright future that could make a difference here. And namely, I'm talking about Diego, right? Then Kurt joins the show the next week, and he was a little bit more non-committal. And look, this is a contextualized conversation where if you get the right – nobody is untradeable. Babe Ruth, Wilt Chamberlain, we could keep going. Like, nobody's untouchable. That doesn't exist. And if the right offer comes along that makes sense for the club, I'd imagine you'd still do it. And then Jason joins the show and basically says what Pablo was alluding to was a little bit overstated, is how I'll put that. Shed some light here on what some people believe is a new approach and other people believe is not necessarily the deal.
Yeah, I think both are right? Like, I think Pablo has been communicated to that, hey, we're not just going to keep running young guys out there and try to flip them. Obviously, we did well last year with Barajas and then Andres Gomez, right? But particular to Diego Luna, it's you have it right. Like, there's a number. I don't know what the number is, but at some point, somebody's going to come to us with a number that's going to make us think long and hard. Now, that being said, I do believe that Steve Starks and others at the Miller Group are like, okay, as we're learning how this league works and how this sport works around the world, what needs to happen for us to keep Diego Luna here for a long time, and Emeka Anelli and Justin Glad, and how do we build a core that we can then add around that will compete for trophies and win titles and win championships? That's their stated desire. So does it mean that we won't sell young players? No, of course not. Like, we cannot participate in the world marketplace if we don't eventually sell, I don't know, man, Dom or Gozo or Aiden or Owen Anderson or, we've got a million great young goalkeepers. Like, those guys are going to kind of dictate their path. Not everybody is going to want to stay in Salt Lake for another 15 years or 10 years even. But there may be some guys that really do say, you know what, I want you to build this club around me. I want to be the leader, and I want to bring hardware back to Salt Lake City, which clearly hasn't happened in 15 years. So I think it's going to be maybe a little more of a hybrid approach than what Kurt and Jason and Pablo were kind of tasked with over the last 3 years, where clearly having the Blitzer relationship and the family of clubs that they either have majority or minority interest in, where there maybe is more of an opportunity for a more volatile roster construction and having players go in and out. But we're not going to sell Diego just to sell him. Like, it's got to hit a number that makes sense. And again, that's something Diego and his agent will very much participate in that conversation, as well as Andres and his did, as Gavin Beavers and his did, as Fidel Barajas and his did. So it's a collaborative process still. So that is very much the consistent factor going forward in the world marketplace for what we believe will be several emerging classes that are 15 years old, 17-year-olds now that will have an opportunity to either play long-term in MLS or maybe go chase a dream in South America or Europe or somewhere else overseas. It's very much a customized, I think, opportunity for each player at different stages.
You sound grumpy, man. You all right?
Well, Nikola Jokic is untradeable if you want to go in that direction.
Oh, he's going to look so good in a Knick jersey. Good luck with Cat in Denver.
If him and Michael Malone are reunited in MSG, I'll become a Knicks fan.
Love it. All right, buddy. Thanks for the time. We'll chat soon.
Thank you. Pleasure.
All right, let's
Bye.
welcome in Ryan from the Dish Pros. Give him a call at 801-424-DISH, where you can save a bunch of money on a bunch of different things. What's going on, Ryan?
Spence, thanks so much as always. Great opportunity right now. Guys, Dish just unveiled this new promotion where you get set up and you get the 2-year offer, which we've been offering forever, and where the price is guaranteed. You don't have to worry about price increases, any changes in your bill. But how about this? You can get 3 months of your service free as a new customer. This is the opportunity you're looking for. If you want to save some money, do an upgrade, call us today. Take advantage of the deals that we have, including internet too. We have these fantastic offers where you can get internet from $35 to $50 a month. I've got a half a dozen different providers available. So we have a solution for almost everyone. If you call us today and get you set up and installed as early as next day, we'll throw in dinner at JCW's, movie channels, and get you the biggest, fastest DVR out there with the very best price and 3 months free. Call us, 424-DISH, 801-424-DISH.
All right, there he is, Ryan from the Dish Professionals. We're going to catch up with Dave Fox coming up on the other side. I'll be on TV with Dave tonight at 10:35 on KMYU. We call it 5 Questions with Spence. Then we'll get into the 5 o'clock hour of the program, all before we say goodnight at 6, right here on ESPN 700.
Okay.
Did you say
I got half an ear in.
Madison Beer? Is that
Madison
it?
Beer, yeah.
Okay.
15 Minutes was the name of that song.
All right.
Which is about how long I'm going to last.
That sounded like Sabrina Carpenter, like pop. What is that?
Well, it's basically EDM, but she's a pop artist.
It is still
She's got a couple of really good songs.
When did you get into EDM music?
I've been in it my entire life, really.
It's so weird.
That's not possible.
In the 80s, it was new. It was called new wave.
They didn't have EDM.
Well, but it was disguised as a different name.
It's a good point.
Okay,
Porter.
that's funny. That's hilarious.
That's a good point. No, so you've always been in like house music.
Yeah, I like house music.
When you were DJ Dave Fox,
and I also like eclectic music, like Enya. That kind of thing.
Let's rock a little Enya before we get out of here.
But I don't ever give you that because or
little
Enigma.
Caribbean Blue.
I'm a big Enigma. I'm a big Enigma guy too.
Okay, so you just run the spectrum.
Yeah, Moby.
Mm-hmm.
He does a little bit of everything.
And to be clear, you're not constantly taking Molly and listening to EDM house music.
Molly?
You are drug free.
Oh yeah.
Okay, I'm just making sure because most people love EDM. They like the glow sticks and all that stuff.
I like the beat. I like the sound of it. That's what I'm rocking when I'm driving down the street.
Well, you're an upbeat, positive guy. It kind of tracks with your personality.
I've always been a glass half full. Always.
Have you?
Sure.
All right. So are you?
I'm always looking forward.
Are you glass half full about the Utah Jazz offseason project with a new basketball decision maker in charge?
Well, if you're asking me about the hire, I think it's good. I think it's you know what? We spent hours after this announcement trying to figure out exactly what the hierarchy was. And Ryan Smith made it very clear that Austin Ainge is the guy.
Mm-hmm.
Ainge even, mentions that. He did, wisely mention that everything runs through Ryan. Ultimately, he is, after all, the governor of the team. So it's not like anybody wants to throw out the old nepotism thing. Maybe he got a little help to this kicking off his career, but he's made a name for himself. We know that, and he's done a very good job of that. And if he hadn't gotten this job, sooner or later he was going to be a team president somewhere. It was just going to happen. That's the trajectory he's on. And I think Ryan even mentioned that he thought that might have happened last year and that he missed his opportunity. So I think it's a good hire. It gives the organization even more voices, which they probably need. I don't know how much. I think we all know Danny doesn't want to, kill himself working, and he shouldn't. He's earned, whatever semi-retirement you want to call it. Zanek's been through some health things, so there's a lot of. This is good. This is really good.
Yeah, the nepotism thing. In fact, Porter, since Dave brought it up, I want you to take the opportunity to remind Dave and our audience what the official stance is of the drive as it pertains to nepotism.
Yeah, officially. From this show, and tell your son this too, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
No nepotism. Can't win with him. Don't like it.
We are anti-nepotism on the show.
Okay, but let's be very clear. Fine. But that's what I just said. By the way, my son's an attorney. He's not even in the media business. So that's never going to pertain
nobody
to
was
me.
accusing you of nepotism.
And I don't think your son's waltzing in here anytime soon.
No, I've seen Andrew on the sideline before
with some sideline.
He's got
passes.
some perks.
Fox not a box. I just want to be clear that the audience knows the official stance of the drive is we are anti-nepotism.
Well, then I'm guessing you agree with me that there isn't a blatant piece of nepotism on this, or do you not agree with me?
No, Dave, it's a bit. It's a bit because our texters don't really understand that I'm being facetious because I have a famous father. It's a bit that we do on the show. But here's the deal. Like
in my case, I am the famous father.
You are. No, here's the deal. Like Danny's pedigree speaks for itself. He doesn't need me to stand up for him. And Austin's pedigree speaks for itself. He worked for the Boston Celtics for 17 years. The Boston Celtics have been the preeminent franchise in pro basketball along with the Lakers, well, really forever, but certainly the modern day addition of the Boston Celtics after they made it out of that weird like Antoine Walker phase and started winning championships. Austin's had a front row seat for all of it. Brad Stevens is one of the most respected basketball people, period. And Danny's been out of Boston now for, I think, 4.5, almost 5 years. If Austin wasn't good at his job, they wouldn't have let him stick around just because he was Danny's kid. He left. He has a resume that indicates he is qualified for the job he's been hired for. I find it interesting that apparently Danny and Justin are reporting to Austin.
Yeah, that part's interesting.
What if he just fires his dad? He's like, Dad, you're playing too much golf.
Here's the part I don't get is how, and I don't know that much about how companies break down their levels of leadership, but isn't the CEO generally the top guy?
Yeah,
ahead of the president.
Yeah, but look, here's the deal. Like,
I don't get that.
And Porter brought this up earlier. Danny technically retired when he left the Celtics.
That's what he did.
He wanted to move out here. So, and I've known the Ages my entire life. Okay, so the deal with Danny is he's not one of these guys that just says, I want time to spend with my family and then goes and travels to Europe for 6 months out of the year. Danny is a committed father and grandfather and wanted to move out to Utah because the majority of his kids are here.
Yeah.
So he retires from Boston. And also remember, he definitely had one heart attack, and I think he may have had two. He had heart issues at the end of his time with Boston. So he left to retire to take care of himself, to move out here to be with his family. And he did not move out here with a plan of working for Ryan. Ryan recruited Danny for months before this transaction actually became official because Danny made it very clear, I want freedom to see my grandkids. I like my tea times at Riverside. I'm going to play golf. Okay, so if you want me involved, it really has been more or less a quasi senior advisor role. The title is CEO, but Danny's not at the Zions Bank Basketball Center every day at 7 a.m.
No, he's not.
He's present for games. I'm sure he's present for these workouts. I'm sure he's present in draft rooms. But I think this is even a further indication that Danny might take another step in the direction of just living the rest of his life the way he wants to live his life. And I don't begrudge anybody for paving a path. Like, if you don't know what it's like to be a parent and how badly you would do anything to make sure your children have a good path in life, I don't know what to tell you. I don't have an issue.
Exactly.
So Ryan said, I didn't tell Danny that I was hiring Austin. No part of me believes that. No part of me believes that for a second. We'll get to the other parts of the stuff I don't believe either. But if Danny even had a small part to play in this decision, I don't have an issue with it at all.
I don't either.
Because he is going to potentially step away at some point entirely, and he knows that his kid's got a great opportunity to build a team with a job that will take care of he and his family forever. It's a great thing altogether. But again, the bottom line is Austin has a resume that indicates he is qualified for this job. He does.
And maybe in Danny's case, we're reading too much into the title of CEO. Now, take, for instance, a lot of guys who own big companies, big corporations, the first thing they do when they retire is they become what? The chairman of the board.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't a chairman of the board for the Jazz, so maybe CEO is that version of chairman of the board in the case of, how Ryan sets everything up. But again, getting back to your point, Austin's proven himself, and he's proven himself repeatedly. This year they stumbled towards the end, but they didn't panic like, a certain team in New York did. Did the Knicks? Did they fire their coach? So wait, the Knicks and the Jets.
They fired my guy. How
much did you really like that guy, though?
Tom?
A lot.
Love him.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I've known Tom forever. He was Jeff's assistant.
Why don't they bring back Van Gundy?
He's on the Vegas list of the Vegas released a list of odds, and Jeff is like.
But Malone's
fourth.
the highest.
Malone is 1-1. He's a New York guy too.
I didn't mean to turn right there on that.
No. But ultimately, I just think it was a scenario where Danny didn't agree to come work for Ryan unless Ryan agreed that Danny was going to be able to have freedom. And I think that kind of remains in place. And I think Austin's hiring indicates that freedom might be something Danny wants even more. So Austin has a reputation in pro basketball as somebody that understands the cap, somebody that's drafted well, somebody that's conducted workouts and has been able to find bit pieces to surround the star players that Boston had and won championships. Austin Ainge has a championship ring, okay? So, his pedigree speaks for itself. I do wonder where Zanuck is with this entire thing, and I honestly don't know.
But I feel like Zanuck, after his last medical situation, kind of referred to. Well, I didn't say he wanted to step back, but he's been through a lot as well, and maybe this will help him. Maybe it's not such a bad thing to, there's a lot that goes into this when you're looking for players and you're scouting and you're in Europe and you're all over the world, and hey, the more eyeballs you have, the better. So. But I don't know. Neither of us have had a conversation with Justin to ask him exactly what he feels about that. I thought it was interesting that, Danny Ainge was at the press conference yesterday, but he was kind of just in the back.
Yeah.
He wasn't up on the podium. And that's the way it should have been. I mean, it was, the guy that hired Austin and Austin. But that's a good question. But I'm not as cynical as you to believe that maybe Ryan didn't tell Danny he had hired his son. Maybe wait a second. Maybe he told him I'm having some conversation with your son, but didn't flat out tell him, oh, I hired him until after he had hired him. Or I'm going to hire him.
Yeah. Okay.
But again, it gets back to the glass half full. That's me.
Sure.
I'm
Sure. Yeah.
You're more America's guest. And
sure.
There's nothing wrong with that.
I wish I believed.
We all have our suspicions
that Disneyland was a real place and not a theme park, Dave. I wish I believed in children's fairy tales too. What
do you mean it's not a real place? I've been going there my whole life. It is a real place,
and it's a lot of fun. I live in the real world. Okay. So the other part of me will exist where I'm a cynic and you're glass half full.
Yeah.
You think they're not going to tank next year?
Your buddy asked that question, and the answer. I think Austin's answer was like 3 words. It
said you won't see that.
You won't see it this year. Yeah. What's he supposed to say? He can't literally answer a question that's phrased that way with, "Yeah, we're going to tank again. Let's go." They got fined for tanking. Mm-hmm. They're not. The question that was asked in such a way that that's the only possible response he could have gotten.
Well, I'm not as cynical as you to believe that he had to say what he had to say.
Well, he can't say, "Yeah, we're tanking."
So ultimately, just no part of me believes that they are going to put their best foot forward to try to win as many games as they can next year. It would actually be the direct wrong line to take.
Okay, that part I agree with you. But I don't begrudge Austin's answer.
No, first of all, I thought it was an awesome soundbite. I thought it was great. It was like I dropped them like, you're not going to see that next year. Right. And then boom, silence. And everybody's like, okay, good, a new direction.
But the fact that he invoked the word tanking into the question, it made that answer perfectly honest in a way, because there are so many different ways to manipulate your record. And by the way, didn't we learn this year? You don't have to finish dead last. Let's be honest. They just need to be in the bottom 8, right?
Yeah.
To preserve.
Well, and that's the issue. I mean, as much as anything else this year, based off of where they're at, based off of what they need, and based off of how far away they are from not just the top teams in the West. I mean, there's not a move they could make to move them from like 15 to 11, let alone 15 to 5. It doesn't exist. So based off of how far away they are and how much they need, keeping that draft capital for next year's draft cycle is as big of a priority as anything else that they do this year. It just is.
I agree, but there's other ways to do it. First of all, you play every single one of your young guys like they have been. The one caveat in all this is, what do you do with Markkanen? Because if Markkanen is playing every game and these veterans are playing every game, it's going to be really hard to stay below 8. I'm not saying that they're going to be a playoff team, but that's going to be more difficult. So they're going to have to kind of massage that a little bit.
Well, that's manipulating minutes.
Or trade them.
That's the only – so if we're going to say that what Austin Ainge said yesterday was truthful, and he meant it, and the approach now that there's a new boss, okay, because Ryan told us all he's the boss, and the edict from the boss is we are no longer unserious about competition. We are going to approach this with integrity. We're going to try our best. This roster is too good to be one of the bottom 4 or 5 teams. Now, if you move off of Markkanen, and you can get a lot for Lowry, you can't get a Paul George, Donovan Mitchell type haul, but you can get probably 3 to 4 picks, maybe a couple of young players.
I don't even know if you want players. You just want picks, really.
Well, you have to.
Or really young players. You're right. You'd have to.
You have to acquire players because you have to match salaries.
But you'd also waive them. They're good at that.
Waive Lowry?
No. The players that you bring in a giant package of things, players, draft picks, other assets, and then you waive the player you don't want.
Well, okay, but he's good enough that you can get 3 to 4 picks and probably 2 to 3 young players that you want to learn about.
Perfect.
Right? Yeah. And who knows who the young players are? But if the NBA finds out that the Jazz are willing to move off of Lowry Markkanen, Austin Ainge will receive multiple phone calls from other general managers saying, "Okay, what do you want?" And if Austin says, "Okay, we'll do 4 picks, we'll do 3 unprotected and 1 swap, and then we want these 3 young players, and all these players are between 18 and 22, and they're a lot like the other young players the Jazz have," you might have to do something with Walker as well.
I don't think there's any chance they do that.
Well, Walker's good. Walker's really good. He impacts winning. So if you're going to do the thing where we are playing our best players every night, and we're not making up injuries, and we're not after we get fined, we're not saying, okay, watch this, Walker Kessler shooting 10 threes a night. If we're not doing any of those corny things anymore, and you're trying your best to win games based off the personnel you have to change your personnel. You're too good. Because if we are sitting here, Dave, next year at this time, and the Jazz have won 34 games.
They're in trouble.
And Mark Tatum gets up to the podium and says, and the 9th pick in the NBA draft goes to the Utah Jazz. And that goes to the team that's about to win the title because the Jazz decided they wanted to try really hard this year. It will take the Jazz a couple of steps in the wrong direction. That is worst case scenario, is what it is.
I completely agree with you on that. And whether we want to call it tanking or roster manipulation, that's going to have to be the way they do this, because they do not want to go through what they had to do last year, where we all sat there and looked at Larry Markkinen looking perfectly healthy and not playing. They have to approach this a completely different way.
Yeah.
And one way would be, you're right, to move him. But it's not just him, by the way. I mean, John Collins helps you win games. Colin Sexton helps you win games.
That's my point.
All these veterans, I mean, honestly, they, in some respects, a lot of these guys got to go.
I think finally you can move off of Collins and Sexton.
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't know about Clarkson just because he's not good anymore. I know everyone loves him, show love, nice guy, painted on the locker room.
Throw him in or just keep him on the team for fun.
But his best years are behind him.
Yeah.
But what changes this year, and that's why I continue to look at the summer of 2026 as far as the offseason that makes sense for them to actually get in play, is this year Collins, Sexton, Clarkson are on expiring deals. It's the final year of their deal. So instead, like a GM last year was like, wait, you want me to trade for John Collins? I have to pay him $25 million this year and $25 million next year.
And now they'll pick up an expiring contract.
Now his contract expires, so
valuable.
It actually helps you next offseason if you want cap space. Same thing with Sexton. Same thing with Clarkson. Clarkson's on the books for 14.2. Collins on the books for 19.1. So you can move off of those contracts even if the players aren't necessarily highly sought after, simply because their money expires.
And teams love those kind of deals where they're acquiring expired contracts. The Lowry's isn't. I mean, they just gave him a max deal.
Yeah,
so
but he's good enough that you can find a home for him.
Yeah.
He's good enough you can find a home for him. So that's kind of got to be the play, and then next off season is when they could have potentially $70 million in cap space, unless they decide to do this, extend Walker. So they have the ability to extend Walker this off season. Now, if you want to move off of Walker, which is a tough ask because he's good and he's still young, they won't extend him. That makes him harder to trade. So they would do what they did with Hayward and say, oh, you think you've earned a deal, huh? Well, you're going to play the last year of your rookie deal. Then you have to go bet on yourself. And that's what Gordon did. He had a really good year, then got a max offer sheet from Charlotte. Then they matched the offer sheet. Gordon played here for 4 more years before he gave everyone the middle finger and went to Boston. So they could extend Walker unless they've done their calculation, believing we're too good with this group. If we want to hold on to our draft pick and also back up what Austin said, meaning we're going to try hard this year, they've got to change their personnel.
Well, I don't know that he actually used the phrase "try hard" this year, but
if we're not going to lose intentionally,
yes. But again, circling all the way back to where this started, if the question had been phrased in such a way that the word tanking wasn't in it, maybe he gets a little bit of a different answer. You can't even say roster manipulation because everyone knows that's tanking.
It was the way you had to ask the question. It was the right way to ask the question.
Well, maybe, but you weren't going to get an answer with that. So that's just the way it is.
You got an answer. And so if he's telling the truth, they have decisions
you weren't going to
make.
get I don't want to say honest answer because I'm not putting words in Austin's mouth, but he doesn't have any other choice to answer that question any other way. That's what I'm saying.
And what I'm saying is if he's telling the truth, they need to change their personnel.
Yeah.
Because
You're right.
if Markkinen, Kessler, Sexton, and Collins all play 70 to 75 games, they win 30 to 35 games this year.
I completely
and
agree with you.
That's the worst place to be.
And if they had played them all last year, they probably would have won upwards of 30, I would think. The year before they won nearly that. They did. They went over that. So, yeah, I'm 100% with you on that.
And you know where they drafted the year before? 10th.
Yeah.
And you know where that would go this year? Oklahoma City, who's about to win the championship.
And that 10th pick hasn't worked out so well. We'll see where that goes. But, frankly, their next 2 picks worked out better. We're going to find out in the next 30 to 45 days. We'll see exactly what the new president is made of when he starts shaking things up. It's going to be a lot of fun. I guarantee three words you will not hear out of his mouth: big game hunting.
No, I think they'll steer clear of that.
No way.
Austin, if you're listening, you should fire your dad.
Yeah, do not say that.
All right, you referenced the you referenced the overly irrational, emotional, ridiculously misguided decision of the worst owner in pro sports to fire Tom Thibodeau today. It's an example of why the Knicks have been irrelevant for 25 years, because they make these in-the-moment irrational decisions based off of emotion that you're feeling right now instead of having a big-picture point of view. So juxtapose that to what Ryan's decided to do with the current iteration of the Jazz. The bottom line is this, Dave. You have to have players. You have to have horses. Knicks have players. The Jazz don't. But what Ryan has done is locked in a head coach through 2030, a front office that now is locked in as well, and it takes away the ambiguity and the unknown nature of who's calling the shots in the way that the Knicks have simply just allowed the decisions to be to and fro from the wind, firing good coaches all the time. So there is that. While you need players, at least the Jazz have a coaching staff and a front office that is locked in. Like that is a pragmatic, prudent approach that I think, given time, will pay dividends. But it's going to take a lot of years to understand whether or not it's the right way.
Well,
to
you
roll.
answered your own question perfectly right there, because you look at here's the difference. You got the Knicks in the Eastern Conference Finals with an opportunity to go to the NBA Championship Series, firing a coach, and then a team with the absolute worst record in the NBA re-signing their coach to an extension. And you're right. It goes to show which organization is locked in and which isn't. Think about Washington football for all those years, the Commanders. How horrible, what an awful job they did of running that thing. So, and it also tells you that Ryan is confident in his front office and what they're going to do, and that he knows within a few years they'll be competitive. They'll start being competitive, and he wants to make sure that guy is there running it. I don't know what the world the Knicks are doing, other than you may end up with an even better coach.
Well, it's just it's an example of an owner that's an idiot, and that's who Jim Dolan is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And hopefully Ryan's decision. Will Hardy's won 34% of his games. He has a 9-year runway. Tom Thibodeau just won 50 games back-to-back and went to the Eastern Conference Finals in the playoffs 4 or 5 years and won Coach of the Year, and he got fired.
Can you imagine if Will Hardy wasn't retained? He'd be instantly hireable.
Yeah. Because
people understand what he really is about. But the Jazz are smarter than that.
Yeah, they are.
So,
all right,
anyway.
David, are you wearing that on TV tonight? You look like you just got off the beach.
I'll change.
No, you should wear that. I mean, sometimes
I can't get away with that like you can.
Yeah,
I have to look more respectable.
It's a little stuffy in there with the suits at times. But
I wore a hoodie a couple months ago in the winter. I should have saved that for a night you were on with me.
Are we
hoodie with a sport coat?
Are we warm enough to enter the Dave Fox in shorts phase on
Yeah, I do
yet?
that quite a bit, but I don't do it if it's a show like what you and I are doing tonight where you can see my legs.
Nobody wants to see those
Nobody
legs.
wants to see that.
What's coming up on 5 Questions?
I don't want to reveal all the 5 questions, but I will say we have discussed at least 2 of them here. We're going to throw in an RSL question, a golf question. We had a couple locals, by the way. Zach Blair and Preston Summerhays both qualified for the U.S. Open.
What about Dr. Freestone?
Congrats. Dr. Freestone's doing good. I texted him the other day on an issue, and he got right back.
You want to share what the issue was on air, or are we good?
I'm good.
Okay. But you're healthy? You're good to go?
Yeah, I'm fine.
All right, Dave. I'll see you in a little bit.
Okay, see you, buddy.
The great Dave Fox. I'll be on TV with Dave tonight at 10:35 KMYU. 5 Questions with Spence. We welcome in Ryan from the Dish Professionals. Give him a call at 801-424-DISH. Save a bunch of money on a bunch of different things. What's going on, Ryan?
And today is the day you want to save money. Call us up and we can help you with that. A great offer with Dish. Guys, you get set up, you get the award-winning Hopper. The Hopper 3 with the Hopper Plus technology will allow you to have access to all the streaming apps, but will give you the biggest, fastest DVR out there with access to all your DVR content no matter where you are. Plus, we'll throw in 3 months of service for free. Now, guys, if you go with the bigger package, this is like $400 for you. You can take that free for 3 months. We'll throw in movie channels plus the internet JCWs and have you installed free as soon as the next day. So call us and take advantage of this. We've got great internet solutions available, also half a dozen different internet providers now in this market. And Honestly, it doesn't matter where you are. I have a solution for you, from satellite internet to some fantastic fiber, and also a broadband internet that works fantastic, the same one I've been using for the last 2.5 years. Guys, save money, lower your bill, stop overpaying. I know a lot of you are like, yeah, I know, I need to do it. Just simple. Pick up a phone and call 424-DISH. We'll get you the best price guaranteed. It'll get you 3 months of service for free and throw in dinner at JCW's. Call us now, 424-DISH, 801-424-DISH.
All right, 3 hours down, 1 hour to go. Our guy Tim McMahon stops by in the 5 o'clock hour. Then we say goodnight at 6. So keep it right here on a Tuesday edition of The Drive with Spence Checketts on ESPN 700, 92.1 FM. We are proud to be part of Utah's ESPN radio network. All right, let's get it. Drive at 5 time Tuesday afternoon style. It's about 8 minutes past the hour of 5 o'clock. It is one of those beautiful Chamber of Commerce Salt Lake City days outside. It's about 74 degrees, clear and sunny here in downtown Salt Lake City, Utah. And as it is every single day, it's good to have you along for the ride. Spence Checketts behind the mic, Porter Larson behind the glass. We've had a lively show, a fun show today. Final hour of the program before we say goodnight at 6 o'clock is brought to you today by our friends at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to turn your sports knowledge into cash. With millions of members, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 2,000 times your cash. You can run your game all season long on Prize Picks. There's only one series left in the playoffs, and the championship is officially on the line. That means time is running out for you to put your final takes to the test on Prize Picks, the best place to cash in on your favorite sports. If you've not done it yet, that offer is still good for you. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the promo code ESPN700, and you'll get $50 when you place that first $5 lineup. Do not even have to win your $5 lineup. You just get $50. So download the Prize Picks app, use the promo code ESPN700, and they're going to hook you up with $50. Prize Picks, run your game all season long. All right, big news of the day today. Dropped just about, 20 minutes or so before we sign on air, that the New York Knicks have fired Tom Thibodeau, their head coach, after leading the team to the Eastern Conference Finals for the first time in 25 years and leading the team to back-to-back 50-win seasons for the first time in 30 years. The owner of the Knicks, once again, has made a irrational, emotional, dumb decision to move on from a great, great coach. So, of course, today on the show, we've been talking quite a bit about the juxtaposition between what the Jazz have elected to do, and certainly with the news cycle over the past 24 hours after Austin Ainge addressed the media yesterday here in Salt Lake, being introduced officially as the president of basketball operations. It's interesting to consider and pretty unique, quite frankly, in the ecosystem of professional basketball. Will Hardy has won 34% of his basketball games, yet he received a contract extension through the 2030-31 season. The front office so far, after taking over for Dennis Lindsay, of course, Quinn Snyder, the coach, and Dennis was the roster constructor for a very successful 9-year run of NBA basketball here in Salt Lake with Rudy and Donovan and Quinn as the head coach and Bogdanovich and Conley and Joe Ingles. I could keep going. We have a 4-year sample size coming up on the 4th year. After this front office has decided to deconstruct a really good team and trade 2 superstar players in their prime in Rudy and Donovan, we have 4 years of a rebuild that has not bred much excitement and certainly very little winning, and a coach that has only won 34% of his games. Yet, the front office is locked in. With a new addition yesterday as the president of basketball operations is now Austin Ainge, and according to Ryan Smith himself, Austin will have carte blanche. He'll have final say. He'll be the main voice in that room. I believe Ryan said he'll have the main recommendations, and Ryan is the owner, and owners sign off on final decisions. That's not a rare thing. So you have a front office that so far has conducted 3 drafts with very mixed results. The 2 top 10 picks have been Cody Williams and Taylor Hendricks. We're giving Taylor a pass, certainly, because he hasn't been healthy enough. Cody, in 1 year, didn't show much of anything. Keontae George, I have my questions about Keontae. I think the Jazz do too. Isaiah Collier, Kyle Filipowski, late first, early second round picks looked pretty good last year. It's been mixed to say the least, but you swung and missed so far on your top picks. And I think it's fair to say that the return that you received for Donovan Mitchell and maybe even Rudy, only time will tell, probably wasn't enough. At the time, everybody thought it was this absolute grand slam home run with all of the assets you received in exchange for both those 2-star players in their 20s. It's still incomplete because a lot of the draft capital is yet to convey. We'll see what the Knicks do with 21 this year, a pick they'll receive from Minnesota with a Gobert deal. You did get market in for Donovan, but I don't know that that's enough, quite frankly, based off the way Donovan's played in Cleveland. So you have a front office that has not necessarily shown that they have a track record over the course of 4 years of making the decisions you need to put this organization in a place to start winning and playing exciting basketball. And you have a head coach that has a winning percentage of 34%. Yet you have locked them in as your leadership moving forward. Again, juxtapose that to what the Knicks just did with Tom Thibodeau firing him after a unbelievable 5-year run, the best 5-year run the Knicks have had in 30 years. What I'm saying is, I think what the Jazz are doing is actually the right way to go. The main issue is, and will continue to be, and this isn't brain surgery, it's not rocket science. It doesn't matter who your coach is. It doesn't matter who your front office is. It doesn't matter who your owner is if you do not have players that are good at playing basketball. Seems to be kind of a necessity in the world of the NBA to have basketball players that are good at playing basketball. The Knicks have the players. The Knicks have the talent to at least make the postseason and win a couple rounds. Do I think they're a championship team? I don't. I think they have personnel issues. But the Knicks' inability to simply stick to a plan because their owner is a baby and an immature, petulant child that cannot show any patience will always stand in their way. And the only way, in my opinion, for this to work is to find people you believe in, hire them, get out of the way, and let them do their job. So what Ryan is elected to do to lock in a really good young coach and a front office that he believes in, if given time, could breed the results that we need to see for the Jazz to get back to respectability. They got to find players, though. That's the bottom line. How do they go about doing that? Is this the offseason to do it? I don't think that it is based off of where they're at with their books. They do have a top 5 pick. They have number 21. They have 2 second-round picks. But as we've been talking about today with our NBA guests, we'll get to Tim McMahon with this as well. The number one priority for the Jazz this year has to be hanging on to that first-round pick they have next year. And if it is not top 8, it goes to Oklahoma City. If it is top 8, moving forward, the Jazz would only convey second-rounders to OKC. And you can stomach that. You can live with that. Oklahoma City is about to win the world championship. And if you, as their Western Conference peer, hand them the 9th or the 10th pick next year in the draft, not only have you set yourself back entirely as the Jazz have to find avenues to add talent, you've also handed OKC, who already, by the way, has the average age on their roster of 24.7. They would be the youngest team to win a championship since 1955. They don't need any more assets. They don't need any more help. And you do not want to be the team that provides that. Which leads me to the final point, based off of what Austin Ainge said yesterday. If tanking or manipulating the system or being unserious about winning is no longer the approach, you have personnel decisions to make in order to maintain your top 8 pick while being serious about competing. And to me, those decisions come down to 2 players, and it's the 2 players on the roster that I really like. And honestly, there's only 2. It's Lowry and it's Walker. Because if you play Lowry Markkanen, Walker Kessler, John Collins, Colin Sexton, those 4 vets, surrounded by some of the young players that hopefully start taking more tangible steps forward. If you play that group 70 to 75 games next year, you're going to win 30 to 35 games. And that puts you right on the line of whether or not you'll be in the top 8. The approach next year, love it or hate it, has to be a lot like it was this year. You need to give yourself another shot next year, grabbing one of these prospects in the draft, including BYU Cougar A.J. DeBonsa. You've got to give yourself a chance to grab a guy like that. And when you get a guy like that, everything changes instantly. Like the Spurs with Wembanyama. They draft Victor Wembanyama. Chris Paul is more inclined to sign with them. Yes, he's at the end of his career, but De'Aaron Fox more inclined to greenlight a trade to play with Wembanyama. You can actually find veteran players that will come live in Salt Lake City if you have something that works, if you have young players that ultimately will lead to winning, because winning leads to what? Success and money. That's how you get paid. If you win championships at the highest of levels, that's how you make your money. And that's why losing out on the Cooper Flag sweepstakes was a big hit. It just was. You draft Cooper Flag, suddenly agents look at you differently, and they encourage their clients, you want to go play with that kid. He's going to be a winner for a long time. But as it is, that's not where the Jazz are at. They're not going to grab a a franchise cornerstone building block number one option at 5? Probably not. Hopefully, I mean, you always leave space for it because you don't have to have the number one overall pick to find stars. So we'll see who they add at 5, see if they stay at 5, see if they utilize 21, and we'll see if they can make a couple of tangible steps forward as far as the development without winning too many games and therefore forfeiting their draft pick and handing it over to Sam Presti in Oklahoma City next year. We'll see what Tim McMahon has to say about this coming up on the other side. Then we'll say goodnight at 6 on a Tuesday edition of The Drive right here on ESPN 700. Shout out Dave Fox, little Enya on the way out of the show today. I got to admit, I was not anticipating Dave as he was going on his diatribe about how much he loves house music and EDM to drop a I also like a Enya.
Enya.
I didn't expect that from Dave today. Nothing wrong with a little Enya, nice and relaxing on a Tuesday.
Yeah, Dave Fox's music taste is very interesting to me. That's that guy's one of one. That's for sure.
He is one of one. I'll be on television with Dave tonight at 10:35 on KMYU. We call it 5 Questions with Spence. Of course, the big news of the day today, Tom Thibodeau has been fired by the New York Knicks, which has driven a lot of our conversation today, juxtaposed to what the Jazz have elected to do while locking in their coach in their front office while trying to find good players in order to win basketball games. Do you have a preference on who replaces Tibbs if you had to pick as far as the names that you've seen?
It's so hard because, and I mentioned this before, I would like you to only make that move if you've already got the guy there, right? And the name that makes sense is Jay Wright. He's the biggest name in coaching that doesn't have a job at the moment. He coached like your entire roster to a national championship at the college level. But everyone that I know of that has been around Jay Wright in the last 2 years says that he's not coming back to coaching. And they seem pretty adamant about that fact. So, you know, while that's the name that stands out to me, I don't know. I don't know how likely it is because it does seem like we're moving into the direction where it's like a regurgitation of the 10 names that you hear every NBA coaching search. No shade to your guy Van Gundy, right? But it just seems like there is such a kind of a cycle of the same 5, 6, 7 names that you hear every time.
I don't think Jeff would want to, well, see, here's the hard thing. Like we've been talking the past couple of days, like I do genuinely wonder how Justin Zanuck feels about everything that's happened.
Mm-hmm.
But he's an NBA general manager, and you want to hold on to that job. So if the Knicks called Jeff and they inquired about whether or not he'd want to coach, you're the head coach of the Knicks. But I don't think Tom Thibodeau is one of his best friends, was one of Jeff's assistants in New York for years. And I just don't think he'll ever work for Jim Dolan again.
That's the thing. He's worked for that guy before. That's the one where it's like, it looks good on paper, but he's tried that. And you probably know as good as anyone, folks that work with James Dolan don't usually leave that building feeling great about James Dolan. So the odds of him, being stoked to come back to New York is not great. And, maybe that gives him leverage on the other side.
So we'll see. Michael Malone is the favorite in Vegas to get that job. We'll see how this plays out. All right, the Stanley Cup Finals begin tomorrow. You can hear the Stanley Cup Finals and the NBA Finals on our radio station. Edmonton, Florida, a rematch of what was just a barn burner 7-game series last year. And then, of course, OKC and Indiana start on Thursday. So there you go. Not a lot of local stuff going on right now. We're kind of entering that dead period with the summer calendar, but we'll do our best to kind of keep you in the loop with everything that we have going on. Porter, what comes our way on a Wednesday edition of the radio show?
Halfway through the work week, we'll get you ready for the rest of the week. Josh Furlong talking some Utah football, some college football at large. Neil Smith, the latest on the NHL, maybe some Utah Hockey Club as well. And then NBA action for the final hour. First, the NBA Daily Assist with our guy Zach Harper of The Athletic, and then we'll go more Jazz-centric with Andy Larson of the Salt Lake Tribune.
All right, there you go. That'll be a fun Wednesday show. Join us for that. We will say good night. Special thank you to Sarah Todd, Tim McMahon, Trey Fitzgerald, and Dave Fox. For any of the sound you may have missed from the show, website is ESPN700sports.com. Download our mobile app and take us on the go. ESPN 700 app is available for free in the App Store or the Google Play Store. Then finally, for what we do in our space every afternoon for 4 hours, we have a podcast page. Wherever you get your shows, we're there. It's called The Drive with Spence Checketts. Apple, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, we're there. Give us a nice review. Say nice things. Give us all the stars. Follow along. It actually helps out the show. For Porter, I'm Spence saying good night. Enjoy your Tuesday evening. Talk to you on a Wednesday drive. As always, you can find it right here on ESPN 700.